Chapter 4497. Haha. Without waiting for Xueqi to speak, Xuehua immediately laughed and said, Senior Su, I'll tell you more when we reach the immortal realm. There are too many people now, so it might be inconvenient to talk about some things. Fairy. Quickly open Zhai Xinglu. Fairy Xingyu glanced at Xueqi angrily. When she saw the coldness in Xueqi's eyes, her heart trembled. Just as Xuehua had speculated, the Punisher Celestial Lord and the Disciplined Celestial Lord were not on good terms, and the Punishment Palace and the Discipline Palace were like fire and water. It was fine if Fairy Xingyu and Xueqi were in the three continents, but if they returned to the immortal realm, how could they be so free? Although they had not yet returned to the immortal realm, Xueqi had already begun to be on guard, and Fairy Xingyu had a premonition of the estrangement between the two of them in the immortal realm. Alas, even if they are immortals. So what? Fairy Xingyu sighed secretly. With a wave of her sleeve, a cluster of starlight flew out from her hand and rushed to the top of the palace. When the brilliance of the top of the palace appeared, a clear and cloudless blue sky appeared in front of Xuehua. Xueqi glanced at Fairy Xingyu and said to Xuehua, Let's go. This is the Chidi River. The signs of the Star Moon Palace's appearance are obvious. It will appear at any time. Okay. Xuehua nodded and followed Xueqi out of Zhai Xinglu. At this time, Zhai Xinglu stopped on a mountain range. On one side of the mountain range, the disciples of the 100 schools of thought had begun to leave Zhai Xinglu one after another. The disciples of Zhai Xinglu, as well as the cultivators who had been selected to follow Zhai Xinglu into the Star Moon Palace, flew to the other side of the mountain range. Xuehua had just looked around when suddenly, an indescribable wind whistled in the distance. Xuehua hurriedly turned his head. In the east, a majestic river seemed to have come from the sky. It rushed across the ground and fell to the end of the sky. The river seemed to be endless and also seemed to be bottomless. The orange river sparkled under the sun. If there was more orange, it would be similar to the blood river. If there was less orange, it would not be as brilliant as it was now. This was the Chidi River. The sparkling scarlet color covered the surface of the river like tiny swimming fish. Wisps of water vapor rushed into the air and emitted a scarlet glow. Although this scarlet glow was very thin, its brilliance was not inferior to the surface of the river. Where the wind blew, the brilliance swayed, and different illusions surged out. Occasionally, some clouds would surge and turn into colored glass, precious pearls, ingots, pearls, and other shapes, making them even more dazzling. Although the scenery of heaven and earth was vivid, after looking at it for a while, Xuehua felt somewhat bewildered. This was because above the surface of the river, the sound of the wind could be heard. Huge gusts of wind whistled past, as if there were many wind tunnels. The strange sounds were even more soul-stirring than the wails of ghosts and howls of wolves. However, in this violent wind, the surface of the river was picturesque, and the waves were like flowers. It was no different from the usual calm and tranquil waves. What was special was that under those thin ripples, the river water did not have any impurities. It was incomparably clear and bright like a crystal. At a glance, one could see more than a dozen feet. Under the surface of the water, perhaps there were some swaying aquatic plants, perhaps there were some floating algae, but no matter if it was fish, shrimp, or river worms, there were no traces of them. Xuehua was just about to release his divine sense to investigate, when boom! The sound of an explosion resounded from several thousand li away in the sky. Immediately, 10,000 waves surged violently like a tide, hiding the sky and covering the earth as they smashed down, covering an area of 10,000 li. Under the waves, an indescribable distortion appeared in the sky of 10,000 li. This distortion was like tens of millions of tiny vortexes. Not only did the nearby airflow mutate, crisscrossing and attacking, even the splashing sunlight flashed with light. The entire space of 10,000 li was filled with these waves, as if an enormous bubble was rapidly spreading in all directions. The ripples soared high into the sky, and clouds were torn apart one after another. Many fine spatial cracks could be faintly seen. The ripples crashed into the river surface, and many ditches that were several feet long were torn open. The ripples blew across the ground, and sand and pebbles were sent flying. Thousands of spider web-like cracks appeared on the ground. However, the surface of the river still did not show any waves. The sand and stones on the ground rushed up several feet and then fell back down. It was as if a large hand was firmly pressing down on the space of several thousand li. Xuehua's gaze fell on the waves of space. Similar to the nine-tailed fox-painted sculpture, layers upon layers of light entered Xueqi's mind. Tens of thousands of balls of light attracted Xueqi's gaze. Although Xueqi tried his best to avoid his gaze falling on these balls of light, in a flash, a spot of light had already appeared in front of him out of thin air. Boom! The moment Xueqi's gaze fell, a primitive catalogue crashed into Xueqi's mind. This prehistoric catalogue was a little different from what Xueqi had seen before. Although the mountains were extremely tall and the water was extremely deep, the mountains were collapsing and the water was pouring down. Amidst the rumbling of the mountains and rivers, there were many incomparably huge figures crazily fighting. These figures held lightning in their hands and spat out stars from their mouths. With a single punch, the sky would collapse. As their gazes wandered, the stars would explode. All kinds of indescribable wills and unparalleled power swept through the entire primitive world. These wills were extremely provocative and tyrannical. Even the incomparably huge primitive world could not withstand these wills. Xueqi was already at the grand ascension stage of the human race, and he had also experienced the ruins and the primordial continent in the past, but as soon as his spiritual sense came into contact with these consciousnesses, he was struck by a sense of inferiority, and a sense of acute pain welled up in his mind. Xueqi did not dare to be negligent. He hurriedly withdrew his gaze and his scattered divine consciousness from the balls of light. However, in the space within 10,000 miles, a remnant red color had already appeared. The moment Xueqi's gaze fell, the sky gradually darkened. The setting sun, which was supposed to be setting in the west, shone listlessly in this space. Pieces of broken spiritual consciousness, rays of light that had been stripped away, and strands of remnant spiritual consciousness wandered helplessly in the blood-red color. Whoa! Just as Xueqi was about to sigh, a wave that could destroy the heavens and the earth was born in the center of the space. A hurricane suddenly rose with the wave, and thousands of miles of space were torn apart. Wave after wave of collapse spread in all directions. In just an instant, the 10,000 miles of space that was previously covered completely disappeared. The balls of light were void, and the waves were void. Even Xueqi's divine consciousness, which had fallen into the space, was not spared. The collapse of the space was very strange. It was only within 10,000 miles of space, and outside of the wave, it was not affected at all. Furthermore, after the collapse, countless primordial chi of heaven and earth rushed in from other places, and the entire space gradually returned to its original state. Seeing this, Xueqi could not help but be dumbfounded. He thought to himself, "Oh my, what's the origin of this star-moon palace? How is it related to the eldritch world?" However, it was only a moment before he came to a realization. Nonsense, if there's no origin, how can there be an opportunity to enter the immortal world inside? How can two immortals, Xueqi and Fairy Xingyu, spend so much effort to enter? However, the star-moon palace has yet to appear. Just this premonition should be enough to extinguish the ambitions of many cultivators, right? Thinking of this, Xueqi looked around again. Indeed, the spaceship that Zhai Xinglu had restored had already descended from the sky and stopped steadily between the mountains. There were many Zhai Xinglu disciples sitting cross-legged on the spaceship. Every one of them was meditating, and wisps of noble chi and primordial chi of heaven and earth were entering the spaceship through the void. On the mountains around the spaceship, the 100 schools of thought had already dispersed. Many Confucian cultivators were lying on the ground dispiritedly. Some had blood at the corners of their mouths, some had blood seeping out of their 7 orifices, and some even had holes in their heads. Xueqi was only at a corner of the Chidi River. When he looked at the other places, he saw many great demons with 7th-grade primordial chi scattered all over the place. Xueqi's gaze swept across, and there were tens of thousands of them. Unlike humans, the great demons were mostly alone and did not have any followers. Moreover, among the tens of thousands of great demons, nearly 10% of them were lying on the ground, and they all looked seriously injured. There were even close to 100 great demons whose bodies had already collapsed, and it seemed that they would not survive. Not far from where the great demons were, there were some Buddhist disciples. There were not many of them, only about 1,000 of them. However, these Buddhas did not have the usual kind looks. Instead, they were all glaring angrily, and it was obvious that they were Buddhist guardians. On the other side of Zhai Xinglu, the situation was different from that of the demon race. Although it was already dusk, there was a brilliant brilliance in this space. Layers of auspicious clouds spread out in the sky like a barrier. Pillars of awe-inspiring qi, driven by the inscriptions on the armor, danced like horned dragons. Images of men plowing and women weaving, scholars reading at night, and generals fighting on the battlefield appeared on the inscriptions on the armor. Above these images, there were 4 huge flower-shaped flying boats that emitted a low rumble, and a majestic, awe-inspiring aura spread out in all directions. This aura carried enlightenment, subservience, majesty, and also self-admiration. Oh! Just as Xueqi was about to take a closer look at the 4 flower-shaped flying boats, a slightly puzzled voice sounded in his ears. "Why aren't you reacting?" Xueqi turned his head and looked at Fairy Xingyu, who was standing not far away and looking at him. He smiled and said, "What kind of reaction does this junior need in order to express his admiration for the Star Moon Palace? Is it subservience to the aura in the premonition?" No. Fairy Xingyu was obviously not attracted by Xueqi's deliberately awkward choice of words. Instead, she shook her head and said, "You definitely have some secrets that you have not mentioned. The premonition of the Star Moon Palace is extraordinary. Even when Xueqi and I saw it for the first time back then, we could not help but be deeply affected by it and almost suffered from it. However, you are completely fine. It even gives me a feeling that this is a common occurrence." "Oh? If even the 2 seniors are deeply affected by it, what about the other disciples?" Xueqi was shocked and hurriedly looked at the flying boat that Zhai Xinglu had transformed into. "They are fine," Xueqi's voice sounded. "Because the premonition is too powerful, I have already placed a restriction outside the flying boat. The disciples of Zhai Xinglu cannot see these premonitions. After a while, I will open the restriction and let them get used to the aura of the Star Moon Palace." "That's good." Xueqi looked at the strange flying boat and said with a smile, "Senior, the style of this flying boat doesn't look very good." Chapter 4498. That's right. You have good taste. Fairy Xingyu was a little surprised by Xueqi's reaction. Xueqi wanted to distract her, but he couldn't. However, when Xueqi mentioned the style of the spaceship, her attention was immediately attracted. She pursed her lips and said with a smile, "When I built this spaceship, I didn't like this style. But Xueqi said that this was the style of his hometown spaceship. He liked it, so I had to give in to him. Xueqi, you really have good eyes. You can tell at a glance that this spaceship is not good-looking." "That's right." Xueqi pointed to the huge deck and the cabin on the deck and said with a smile, "This style is too square. It's actually not suitable for the spaceship to fly. Junior's 2 thunderboats are not as big as Senior's spaceship, but in terms of flying speed, I'm afraid that Senior's spaceship can't compare. Your thunderboat borrowed the essence of the thunder vanquishing bead and used the thunder pool as its driving force. It doesn't need any primordial stones or arrays as its foundation, so its speed is naturally fast." Xueqi glanced at Xueqi and said, "Punisher Heavenly Lord has such a flying boat. How can I compare to Punisher Heavenly Lord?" Xueqi patted his forehead and pretended to be surprised. "What a pity. What's wrong?" Fairy Xingyu was surprised and asked, "Did you forget something?" "No," Xueqi said in all seriousness. "Junior missed the opportunity to flatter the 2 seniors. The 2 thunderboats are exactly one for each of us." "Do you really have this intention?" Xueqi raised his eyebrows and asked. Xueqi was originally joking. However, after hearing Xueqi's words, he pondered for a moment and immediately understood the meaning behind his words. Without any hesitation, Xueqi took out 2 blank jade eyes from his bosom and placed them on his forehead. After a moment, he respectfully handed the 2 jade eyes to the 2 and said, "I presume that the 2 seniors don't care about the construction method of the thunderboat. This is the construction method of the thunder pool, and also the result of Junior's comprehension of the thunder vanquishing bead. I hope the 2 seniors don't mind." Fairy Xingyu smiled slightly, took the jade eyes, and said, "At least you have a conscience. I've already given you so many things, and you only remember to give me this little bit. The lightning pool has always been a secret of the immortal realm. You were able to obtain the thunder obliteration bead, so you obtained the method to create the lightning pool. Although I don't know if the lightning pool can be used in the immortal realm, it is still a prototype, a direction." Xueqi took the jade eye and nodded. "Thank you." Then, Xueqi turned to look in the direction of the spaceship and said, "Someone is looking for you." Xueqi nodded and looked in the direction Xueqi was looking. He saw Gong Shu Exin and Gong Shu Ming flying towards him with excitement and a hint of nervousness. Gong Shu Exin flew in front while Gong Shu Ming hid behind her. Her face was still red. Xiaohua smiled. He raised his hand and waved at the two women, indicating that they should fly over. Gong Shu Exin immediately sped up, leaving Gong Shu Ming far behind. Gong Shu Ming stomped her feet in the air and chased after them. Gong Shu Exin flew in front of Xiaohua, tilted her head and looked at him. She hesitated for a moment, not knowing how to address him. Then she said, "Senior Xiao, how did you cultivate?" Xiaohua was not unhappy to see this unsophisticated woman asking such a question. After all, only such a woman would have a pure heart. It was precisely this kind of cultivator that could be favored by the heavenly Tao. But he still said angrily, "Palace Master Xingyue and Senior Su are here. Why don't you greet them first?" "Yes, I was wrong." Gong Shu Exin was straightforward. She hurriedly bowed to Fairy Xingyu and Suji and said, "Greetings to the two seniors. I just feel that Senior Xiao is really unbelievable. When I saw him last time, he was only about the 5th level of essence energy. In just 200 years, how did he reach the Mahayana realm? I really don't understand. I remember that I blood sacrificially refined an imperial artifact to test my age." Seeing Gong Shu Exin speaking so casually, as though she was an old acquaintance of Suji and Fairy Xingyu, Xiaohua coughed twice and said, "Miss Exin, yes, senior." Although Gong Shu Exin was speaking to Fairy Xingyu, her ears were perked up. When she heard Xiaohua calling her, she immediately said, "What's the matter?" Junior Gong Shu Ming greets the three seniors. At this moment, Gong Shu Ming had already flown over. She was completely different from Gong Shu Exin. She greeted Xiaohua politely and placed Xiaohua last. This meant respect and intimacy. And although Gong Shu Ming was respectful, she still could not see Fairy Xingyu's eyes. Fairy Xingyu asked with interest, "Exin, continue, sure." Gong Shu Exin was about to continue when Gong Shu Ming smiled and said, "Sister Exin, didn't you want to ask about the apprenticeship? Why are you talking about other things?" That's right. Gong Shu Exin immediately came to her senses and asked Xiaohua, "Senior, didn't you say you would find a master for me? Where is he?" Xiaohua smiled and said, "Your master is a good friend of mine. His name is Wen Chu. I don't know where he is now. Follow me. When you meet him, I will let you become his apprentice." "Wen Chu?" Suji frowned slightly and said, "What big words?" Fairy Xingyu also felt strange and said, "Xiaohua, what is your good friend's cultivation level? How come I have never heard of his name?" Junior's good friend is a hidden expert. Ordinary people don't know about him, Xiaohua said and looked at Suji with a guilty conscience. After all, during the 5 brocade cloud painting battle at Black Wind Ridge, Xiaohua had revealed 3 heavenly hearts. Xiaohua did not know if Suji could see through it. Fortunately, Xueqi did not suspect him. He only looked indifferently at the chitty river in the distance. However, at this glance, Xiaohua discovered something strange. This was because Xueqi, who was as cold as a rock, actually had a rare sense of warmth when he saw Fairy Xingyu's appearance. "What expert? How come I don't know?" Fairy Xingyu obviously did not notice that warmth. She said angrily, "Zhai Xinglu's Hall of Heroes has recorded all the high-level cultivators in the 3 continents. Even the Panglai Immortal Realm is no exception." Panglai Immortal Realm? Xiaohua's heart skipped a beat. He smiled and said, "Are the Dao sect cultivators on the Xian ranking all cultivators from the Panglai Immortal Realm?" "Of course." Fairy Xingyu nodded and said, "If it's not the Panglai Immortal Realm, how can there be Dao sect cultivators with 8th grade essence power? Even if it's the Western Paradise, the Lei Yin Temple would never allow high-level Dao sect cultivators to exist." "Senior, how can a cultivator escape from the Panglai Immortal Realm?" Xiaohua said with a smile. "After all, that thing is in the hands of Immortal Emperor Gaochen. How would I know? You can ask your good friend who is a Confucian cultivator to ask the Immortal Emperor." Fairy Xingyu said coldly, "He's called Wen Chu. I'm afraid he's on par with the Immortal Emperor, right?" These words confused Gong Shu Isin and Gong Shu Yiming. They didn't dare to interrupt and could only wait by the side. Oh, by the way, Missy Xian, what did you say about the imperial equipment that you refined? Fairy Xingyu suddenly remembered and asked Gong Shu Isin with interest. Gong Shu Isin answered without thinking. It's nothing. It's just that the imperial equipment measured that Senior Xiao is only 400 or 500 years old. Xiao Hua wanted to stop her, but he thought that if he continued to talk, he would definitely reveal himself. Therefore, he simply stopped talking and waited for the last denial. That's impossible. Fairy Xingyu said with a smile, if he was 500 years old then and 300 years old now, he's only 800 years old. Who in this world can cultivate to the Mahayana realm before the age of 1000? Not only did Fairy Xingyu not believe it, but even Xueqi was stunned. He withdrew his gaze from the Chidi River and looked at Xiao Hua. Of course. Xiao Hua said with a smile at that time, I said that the imperial equipment that Isin refined was a little off. What? When Gong Shu Xian heard Xiao Hua say that her imperial equipment wasn't good, she immediately retorted unconvinced. Junior's imperial equipment isn't any different on Senior's body, but on other people's bodies, it works. That's Xiao Hua's problem. Fairy Xingyu said with a smile. Isin, do you still have that imperial equipment? Gong Shu Isin nodded and said, of course. Ah, silly girl. Xiao Hua said earnestly. You should be careful. She is a senior, but she's only the palace master of Xingyue. What about me? I'm your future master's good friend. Can't you tell who's closer and who's further away? Don't be sold by others and count the copper coins for them. Yes. Gong Shu Isin lowered her head and answered. Her figure flew more than 10 feet away from Fairy Xingyu. Little girl, how about I exchange this for your imperial equipment? Fairy Xingyu raised her hand and took out a jade eye and handed it to Gong Shu Isin, saying, you can take a look at it before you decide. Okay. Gong Shu Isin took the jade eye. After looking at it, her face was filled with ecstasy and she said anxiously, Senior this, Shu. Fairy Xingyu stopped Gong Shu Isin from saying more and only asked, are you willing to exchange? This. Gong Shu Isin thought for a moment and handed the jade eye back to Fairy Xingyu, saying, it's better not to exchange. What do you mean not to exchange? You must exchange. Xiao Hua was anxious. With a flick of his sleeve, he took the jade eye and said, just give your imperial equipment to her. She's in the bidding business. If you don't take advantage of her, who do you want to take advantage of? Yes, Senior. Gong Shu Isin rolled her eyes and immediately understood Xiao Hua's words. Without hesitation, she took out the imperial equipment and respectfully handed it to Fairy Xingyu, saying, thank you, Senior. Chapter 4499. Of course, Fairy Xingyu did not care about Xiao Hua's narrow-mindedness. She took the imperial equipment and activated it slightly. Seeing layers of rainbows appear, Fairy Xingyu smiled and said, who said that Missy Xian is stupid? It is precisely this kind of pure-minded cultivator who can become an array master. I think this imperial equipment is really well refined. Xiao Hua, your good friend is lucky. Of course. Xiao Hua handed the jade eye to Gong Shu Xian and said, Xian will definitely become an array master of her generation in the future. She will definitely be unprecedented. Haha, if she becomes unprecedented, what about her master? Fairy Xingyu pursed her lips and said with a smile. She will naturally be an unprecedented master. Xiao Hua was not afraid of Fairy Xingyu's sarcasm. This girl cultivates the 5 Qi thunder? Xueqi also spoke. He looked at Xiao Hua thoughtfully and said, it's suitable for you to accept her as your disciple. I have enough disciples, so I won't snatch others' opportunities. Xiao Hua touched his nose and smiled bitterly. You can't accept any more. Fairy Xingyu said with a smile. There is no more space on the Xianhuang list. Here is a small thing for you. Xueqi casually took out a palm-sized arc from his bosom, in which there were some lightning threads that formed a knot. He said, this is a natural object. It may not be comparable to the 5 brocade cloud painting, but if you can comprehend something from it, it will be more useful than any secret art or lightning array. Of course, Gong Shu Yiming did not dare to act on her own. She looked at Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua smiled and said, why are you looking at me? Why wouldn't you want something that is delivered to your door? Thank you, Senior. Gong Shu Yiming was overjoyed. She took the arc-shaped object and stood beside Gong Shu Xian happily, looking down at it. Ah, it's good to be young. Fairy Xingyu looked at the imperial equipment in her hand that flew across the sky like a rainbow bridge. Each section of the light was like a growth ring, which seemed to record the vicissitudes of life. She could not help but sigh. Maybe you don't have to care about the past, as long as you live each day well. Xueqi did not look at Fairy Xingyu. Fairy Xingyu bit her lips slightly and replied, "A person will always be lonely. Only when the two butterflies fly will there be happiness." Xiaohua, look at that flying boat. Xueqi ignored Fairy Xingyu as if he was deaf. He pointed at a strange flower-like flying boat in the distance and said, "That's the Dongfang family's bamboo flying boat." Bamboo flowers? Xiaohua stared blankly for a moment, then asked curiously, "The flowers of bamboo? Don't tell me. Bamboo can bloom?" Xueqi replied indifferently, "Bamboo will naturally bloom. However, there is a saying in ancient books, every 60 years, the bamboo will change its roots, and the roots will give birth to flowers, and the flowers will bear fruit, and the fruit will wither, and the fruit will fall and come back to life." Moreover, the bamboo cultivator sifted through the wind and played with the moon. He lived a carefree and unrestrained life, elegant and untainted. He was a modest gentleman. People often use bamboo as their symbol. However, no one knew that although bamboo had a noble character, after being in the mortal world for a long time, it would also be polluted. This bamboo flower was the bamboo's self-cleansing will. Whenever a bamboo flower appeared, it meant that the bamboo could no longer endure the filth and wanted to cleanse itself and be reborn. The Dongfang family is one of the 4 great families of the hidden immortal continent. They used bamboo flowers as the symbol of their family. It's really thought-provoking. Xiaohua looked at Ruojian, Ruosui, and the rice-like bamboo flowers and said with a wry smile, "Junior only feels that this flying boat is uglier than Senior's flying boat." Pfft. Fairy Xingyu couldn't help but laugh and said, "Don't let Dongfang Qianghao hear this, or he will fight you to the death." Senior. Gongshu Yiming was very obedient. At this time, he had already received the things that Xueqi gave him. He carefully pointed at another flying boat and said, "That orchid-like flying boat belongs to the Ximen family. And this Xiao understands." Xiaohua nodded. "An empty valley, a solitary flower, elegant and pleasant, is a virtuous person in the world. The Ximen family wants to be a solitary flower, but this Xiao doesn't know much about the 4 great families. I don't know if they can do it. All solitary flowers are fake. If they want to be a solitary flower, why would they appear in front of the Xingyue palace?" Fairy Xingyue smiled coldly, looking very disdainful of the 4 great families. Xiaohua smiled slightly and pointed at the flying boat that was blooming with plum blossoms. He said with a smile, "This is a noble person with lofty ideals. He stresses on exploring the waves and cutting the snow and ice. I'm afraid he's from the Nangong family, right?" Senior is wrong. Gongshu Yiming corrected him bluntly. The Nangong family stresses elegance and independence. They don't follow the trend of the world and want to be a hermit. Their symbol is the chrysanthemum. Hearing this, Xiaohua also snorted and said lightly, "Senior Xingyue said that the Ximen family's solitary flower is empty, but I said that the Nangong family's independence is bullshit. If they want to be a hermit, they can just hide in the mountains. Why do they have to show off here?" Speaking of this, Xiaohua suddenly asked, "Senior, the ancients often say that plum blossoms, orchid, bamboo, and chrysanthemum are the 4 gentlemen of flowers. They stress on pride, seclusion, firmness, and indifference. Junior wants to ask, is this ancient person earlier than the 4 great families?" Haha. Without waiting for Xiaohua to finish speaking, Fairy Xingyue understood his meaning. She covered her mouth and laughed. "Is there a need to ask? This ancient person, of course, is after the 4 great families. If there were no 4 great families, how could there be Confucian cultivators? If there were no Confucian cultivators, how could there be 100 schools of contending? In that case," Xiaohua said with a smile, "the title of plum blossoms, orchid, bamboo, and chrysanthemum is some people flattering the 4 great families? Yes, if it wasn't a big flattery, how could 4 ordinary flowers be regarded as the 4 gentlemen?" Fairy Xingyue also greatly belittled the Confucian cultivators. Gongshu Isin and Gongshu Yiming were dumbfounded. To be honest, they had never thought of this problem. A good illusion was actually said to be so unbearable by Xueqi. However, if they thought about it carefully, what Xueqi said was very reasonable. Why were the 4 gentlemen of flowers not lotus, not redbud, and not jade lotus? Why were they the most ordinary symbols of the 4 great families? Don't listen to their nonsense. Xueqi said in a faint tone. The predecessors can't be verified. Maybe the 4 great families picked the ones they liked from the 4 gentlemen? It's also possible. As the 5 of them spoke, the clouds above the 4 flying boats began to disperse. Many Confucian cultivators flew out of the flying boats, and these cultivators flew to different places. Some cultivators from the various families that had been resting in the mountain range also flew out and landed on the 4 flying boats. It seemed that they were going to visit the disciples of the 4 great families. It seems that there are many Confucian cultivator families close to the 4 great families. Xueqi narrowed his eyes, looking at the Confucian cultivator disciples flying out, and said meaningfully. Fairy Xingyue said with a double meaning, whether there are many or few, I'm afraid there are more than the Sun family. Separated for a long time, united for a long time, divided for a long time. This seems to be a trend. Xueqi nodded. Now is the time of turbulence, and it is also the time of heroes. If so, is it also the time for the Dao sect to rise? Fairy Xingyue looked at Xueqi and reminded him worriedly. How would I dare to think about something that even the 2 seniors don't dare to think about? Xueqi smiled bitterly. Besides, the rise of the Dao sect is not something that can be accomplished by one person's strength, nor is it something that can be achieved by 1 or 2 generations of disciples. Overestimating oneself is like a mantis trying to stop a chariot. You also know that it's like a mantis trying to stop a chariot. Xueqi said with a rare smile. The Dao sect in the world has declined early. Today, the hidden immortal Dao sect is opened. With me, Xueqi, in the world, how dare I let my disciples be bullied and humiliated? Haha. Xueqi laughed. This is just one of my ambitions. With my strength and the time I have left, I'm afraid it's impossible to achieve it. Xueqi didn't say much. Fairy Xingyue smiled and said, You underestimate yourself too much. With your current ability, although you can't revive the Dao sect, the prosperity of the Dao sect is second only to the ancient times. Moreover, Xingyue. Xueqi frowned slightly and scolded. Yes. Fairy Xingyue rolled her eyes and said, And because of your gatha, we noticed you. Xueqi naturally didn't believe Fairy Xingyue's words, but he didn't care that Fairy Xingyue didn't completely reveal her meaning. Fairy Xingyue must have said that he had the ability to revive the Dao sect, but Xueqi knew himself well. He might have the ability to fight against the immortal emperor and the Vairocana Buddha, but it was absolutely impossible for him to revive the Dao sect. The current Fortune Gate was not afraid of any of the families of Confucian cultivators, the Sun family of the Immortal Palace, the Buddhist sect, or even any great saint of the Demon Clan. However, the powerful Dao sect of the ancient times was destroyed by the joint forces of the Immortals, Buddhists, and demons. How could the Fortune Gate be a match for the joint forces of the Immortals, Buddhists, and demons? Seeing that the 3 seniors were talking about the revival of the Dao sect in front of them, Gong Xueqi and Gong Xu Yiming looked at each other and lowered their heads slightly, pretending not to hear. By the way, Xueqi suddenly asked, Xueqi, it seems that you are very resistant to the 4 great families. Could it be that you and the Sun family of the Immortal Palace, Senior, have you forgotten? I have a good friend who is a Confucian cultivator. He is the Immortal General of the Immortal Palace. Xueqi reminded. Haha, I forgot. That Sun Wu is quite interesting. Xueqi nodded and then raised his eyebrows. He looked at the flying boat of the 4 great families and said, The disciples of the 4 great families are coming. I don't want to see them. You deal with them yourself. After saying that, Xueqi flew towards the Chitty River. Xueqi looked at Gong Xueqi and Gong Xu Yiming and said, You 2 accompany the seniors and get to know the disciples of the 4 great families. Perhaps it will be beneficial for you in the future. Yes, Senior. Gong Xueqi and Gong Xu Yiming agreed in a low voice. They watched Xueqi leave with Xueqi. When they turned around, they saw 4 martial grandmasters flying towards them. Fairy Xingyue didn't care, but Gong Xu Yiming didn't dare to. She hurriedly wanted to greet them, but when she saw that Gong Xueqi didn't move, she hurriedly pulled on Gong Xueqi's sleeve. Just as she was about to speak, Fairy Xingyue said, "You don't have to greet them." Chapter 4500. "Yes, Senior." Gong Shu Yiming hurriedly answered, standing there. "We are Dongfang Yushan, Shimen Hengyue, Nangong Ping Ping, and Baiming Qi Han. Greetings, Master of Stars and Moon." The four extraordinarily dignified 7th grade elemental force grandmasters cupped their fists in greeting. "Greetings, immortals." Fairy Xingyu did not find it strange and said with a smile, "The last time I explored the Star Moon Palace, the 4 aristocratic families did not send the 4 fellow immortals. I presume that the 4 fellow immortals have already obtained opportunities in the Star Moon Palace and become literary sages?" Dongfang Yushan smiled. "You're right. The patriarchs of the 4 aristocratic families also sent us to greet you. Thank you for providing us with information. If you need our help in the future, please feel free to ask. When it comes to cooperation, both sides will benefit, but if we don't, both sides will suffer." Fairy Xingyu nodded slightly. "Please go back and report to the patriarchs of the 4 aristocratic families that Zhai Xinglu is Xingyu's Zhai Xinglu and Moon Embracing Palace is Xingyu's Moon Embracing Palace. If they leave Xingyu, they will no longer be Zhai Xinglu and Moon Embracing Palace." The 4 Confucian cultivators looked at each other. Although they did not quite understand the meaning of these words, they somewhat understood in their hearts. They hurriedly nodded and said, "We understand. After we reach the Star Moon Palace, we will definitely pass on these words to the patriarch." "Good." Fairy Xingyu flicked her sleeves and said, "The signs of the Star Moon Palace's appearance have already appeared. It won't be long before the Star Moon Palace appears. As usual, I will go in first, followed by the 4 aristocratic families. Thank you, Fairy." Dongfang Yushan looked at everyone and said, "We will take our leave first. See you in the Star Moon Palace." Fairy Xingyu responded and turned to fly to the resting place of the Zhai Xinglu disciples. Dongfang Yushan flew back with Baiming Qi Han and the others. Nangong Ping Ping smiled and said in a low voice, "Brothers, this Master of Stars and Moon seems very arrogant. She doesn't seem to take us seriously." "Why? Brother Nangong seems to be interested in this woman?" Baiming Qi Han looked at Nangong Ping Ping with interest and smiled. "I'm interested." Nangong Ping Ping did not hide his intentions and replied, "It's a pity that before I left, the patriarch reminded me again and again that I must not disrespect the Master of Stars and Moons. I have the heart but not the strength." "As long as you have the heart, you have the intention," Shimen Hengyue said with a smile. "This huge star moon really makes all the forces in the world envious. If you can deal with the Star Moon Lord, doesn't Xingyue belong to the Nangong family?" Nangong Ping Ping hurriedly waved his hand and said, "I only have the intention. The one with the power is Brother Dongfang. As long as he lifts a finger, Shu." Dongfang Yushan hurriedly stopped Nangong Ping Ping when he saw that Nangong Ping Ping's words were getting more and more unbearable. "Brothers, just say what you want. Don't be too frivolous. How could someone who could establish Star Moon be an ordinary person? The patriarch has already told us to be careful, so why should we look for trouble? I don't know about other cultivators, but senior brother Hang Si, who entered the Star Moon Palace last time, clearly said that the Master of Stars and Moons is a mutant. If you want to obtain an opportunity in the Star Moon Palace and come back alive, don't provoke the Master of Stars and Moons." Nangong Ping Ping shrunk his neck and said with a smile, "I'm just saying." The disciples of the 4 great families flew back to the flying boat as they spoke. Beside the Chitty River, Xiaohua looked at the sparkling water and the moonlight and transmitted his voice. "Senior, Xueqi did not understand why Xiaohua transmitted his voice and replied, "What's the matter?" Although Xiaohua was about to speak, he hesitated for a moment when the words reached his mouth. "Just say it," Xueqi said, "as long as it doesn't involve the secrets of the immortal world, I can answer you. Senior, in your hometown, before you ascended, did you have a dual cultivation partner?" Xiaohua gritted his teeth and asked. "You can't invade my privacy." Xueqi refused without hesitation. "All right," Xiaohua said helplessly. "Actually, Junior thinks that Fairy Xingyue is pretty good. She also has some feelings for Senior. Junior doesn't know if Senior can see it, but as an outsider, Junior can see it clearly. Junior missed a lot of good times before. I don't want Senior to have regrets in the future." Junior thinks that even if there is a gap between two celestial venerables in the immortal world, the matter between you two is a private matter and has nothing to do with the Palace of Punishment and the Palace of Justice. I know. Without waiting for Xiaohua to finish speaking, Xueqi replied in an unusually calm tone. As the saying goes, time breeds love. In the 3 continents, only Xingyue and I have something to talk about. The two of us have been together for so long. How can I not know her thoughts? Then, Senior's heart also has a knot in it? Xiaohua somewhat understood and asked tentatively. That's right. Xueqi nodded. Could it be that you don't have a knot in your heart? Xueqi didn't leave a mark in your heart? Forget it, Senior. Xiaohua raised his hands and surrendered. Just pretend that Junior didn't say anything. It's good that you understand. Xueqi looked at the surging river and whispered, everyone has their own experiences, everyone has their own choices, and everyone has their own consequences to face. I am a punishment envoy, so I naturally know more than you. In terms of feelings, when I was cultivating in my hometown, I could be considered romantic and elegant. But when you walk through flowers, you will always step on the petals and may even be injured by the thorns. When you turn around, other than the fragrance of the flowers on your clothes, how much beauty can you retain? Time flies, the autumn wind urges people. When the snowflakes flutter, even the branches of the flowers will wither. Hee, that's true. Xiaohua said with a smile. Senior's appearance is much more handsome than Junior's, and you have also learned a lot in this aspect. Junior just wanted to remind Senior. Roar. Xiaohua wanted to say something more, but somewhere in the Chitty River, a loud roar suddenly sounded, and beams of starlight and moonlight fell. It was actually a few great demons fighting. Sometimes I envy these demons. Xueqi looked and said with some emotion, if they want to fight, they fight, and if they want to scold, they have no scruples. Their cultivation is also unique. They don't care about Dao heart, Dao realm, nor are they afraid of inner demons. They only need to temper their demon bodies. Those are all demons with inheritances. Xiaohua said with a smile. There are also the vast majority of demons who don't know how to cultivate. They also learn from our Dao sex human race, wanting to condense a demon core in their body. Without waiting for Xiaohua to finish, Xueqi said, you are wrong. This world doesn't have a completely orthodox cultivation method. In the Demon League, there are also those who cultivate demon cores. Xiaohua was a bit dumbfounded. He was proficient in demon cultivation. That heaven-defying Thunder Phoenix was his clone. How is that possible? Nothing is impossible. Xueqi glanced at Xiaohua, somewhat surprised by his shock, and replied, the reason why the Demon League is called the Demon League is because it is made up of extremely suitable demon territories, and different demon territories have different cultivation methods. Either condense the body, condense the core, or Dharma body, or devour the demon soul and condense the soul body. Of course, there are many other methods. Even I don't know. Alas, it's a mess. Xiaohua sighed. Junior only thought that Junior knew the truth, but when the truth was revealed, Junior knew. The truth is not the truth, the illusion is also the truth. You are right. Xueqi nodded. What I said may not be right. After all, the Demon League is only the Demon League. What about above the immortal world? Above the Demon League? Xiaohua suddenly asked, Senior, what is the purpose of cultivation? It's... Xueqi smiled, it's a secret. Xiaohua shrugged and said in a low voice, all right, just pretend that Junior didn't ask anything. The truth of the matter is the truth of the world. It is also like water flowing when the channel is right. If it is not the time for you to know, then you don't have to know. And when it is time for you to know, the truth will float in front of your eyes without waiting for you to find it. Xueqi said, I have been a punishment envoy for so many years. I have also experienced many things. From these things, I have obtained 4 words. Let nature take its course. Xiaohua's words hit the nail on the head. Yes, that's right. Xueqi nodded, not sounding surprised. You have a very easygoing temper. It is easy for you to let nature take its course. This is also Junior's shortcoming. You can say that I am an unambitious person. I like to live a comfortable life that is not as good as the best, but better than the worst. This is already the best life. Xueqi sighed. Io, why is the fight getting fiercer? As they spoke, another 100 great demons joined the battle. The battle was getting bigger and bigger. Xiaohua asked worriedly, don't we need to shout for them to stop? Don't worry about them. Xueqi glanced casually and said, the demon clan has always been like this. Before the Xingyue Palace appears, the power of the starlight will become violent. This will incur the wrath of some great demons with unstable foundations, and it will be easy for fights to break out. When their eyes turn red from fighting, that is when the Xingyue Palace appears. Hearing this, Xiaohua hurriedly turned to look at Zhai Xinglu's spaceship. Indeed, Fairy Xingyue had already given the order from Zhai Xinglu, and a group of Zhai Xinglu's disciples began to prepare for departure. Xiaohua narrowed his eyes and looked at Chitty River. The space that had been disturbed by the fluctuations earlier had sped up again. Layer upon layer of silver tadpole-like light spots had already covered nearly 10,000 miles of the river surface. Under the silver light, the previously orange river surface gave off a crimson glow, looking very strange. Xiaohua muttered in his heart, the Xingyue Palace is finally going to appear. This famous Xingyue Palace. What will it look like? Thinking of the Xingyue Palace, Xiaohua unconsciously thought of the illusory array in the ruins when he fought with the unrestrained heavenly demon. A shuddering feeling quietly emerged from the bottom of his heart. Or rather, a shadow gradually shrouded his heart. Could it be a trap? Xiaohua couldn't help but look at Xueqi. Xueqi didn't pay attention to anything else, but instead focused his attention on the sky above the Chitty River. His face was slightly nervous. Xiaohua was slightly relieved. It shouldn't be. This is not the first time we have entered the Xingyue Palace. Xueqi and Fairy Xingyue have already explored the passageway a few times and returned safely. Chapter 45:01. Another hour passed. Suddenly, the crescent moon that was hanging in the sky for half a day suddenly streaked across the vast sky and nailed itself in the middle of the night sky. Furthermore, the crescent moon from before suddenly expanded, revealing other parts of the shadow. A full moon was swollen and scattered moonlight. The night sky that was originally filled with brilliant stars was now filled with no stars at all. This moonlight was so bright that tens of thousands of miles around the Chitty River were as bright as day. In just a moment, the full moon seemed to shatter, turning into tens of thousands of fragments. Even the moonlight that filled the sky was also divided. Pillars of light appeared in the night sky, and at this time, the night sky seemed to be unable to cover the Chitty River, turning into darkness that was mixed in between the pillars of light. Boom! A muffled sound rang out. Although it came from the horizon, it also shook the hearts of all the humans and demons. The entire world shook under this roar. Like a watermelon being opened, the stars in the night sky were like melon seeds inside the melon, flashing with a black brilliance. It was clearly a black brilliance, but in the dark night, it was clearly seen by people. However, when Xiaohua's eyes turned, the black turned into a red color. After the red color, the 6 colors of orange, yellow, green, cyan, blue, and purple flashed clearly. In the end, every starlight turned into a halo, revealing a translucent milky white starlight. Wang wang wang. On the Chitty River, the space within tens of thousands of miles was shaking. The river water that previously seemed to be tightly pressed down by a large hand was now slowly being split. In just a few breaths, the seemingly endless and bottomless Chitty River was actually split into 2 halves. The severed river water was not like an ordinary river water, forming waves, but was still as calm as before. Swish swish swish. At the same time the Chitty River was cut off, the moonlight that had previously splashed across the Thousand Demons' sacred realm also began to gather, falling within a radius of 1,000,000 miles around the Chitty River. The mottled light and shadow looked like a layer of a giant tree's crown blocking the Thousand Demons' sacred realm. As the light and shadow fell, a thick shadow gradually appeared. An indescribable majesty, heaviness, fear, and suppression seeped out from this shadow. With the appearance of this black shadow, countless chaotic fluctuations rushed out in all directions. Space began to be disturbed, and the heaven and earth origin energy, as well as the aura of righteousness, turned into chaos. An apocalyptic pressure descended upon the Crimson River. Primordial world? As soon as Xiaohua came in contact with this fluctuation and aura, his expression immediately changed. He was simply too familiar with this aura. The ruins were still fine, as the aura of the human clan had rushed out of the desolation aura. However, the incomplete desolation continent was filled with this kind of desolation aura. However, on the incomplete Eldritch continent, the aura of the Eldritch continent was not complete, or rather, It was as ordinary as grass. It did not have the domineering and ferocious aura of the Star Moon Palace before him. Boom, boom, boom. In the middle of the moon, the silhouette of the Star Moon Palace was revealed. Following that, countless pillars of stars shot down. Just like the moonlight, the starlight that had previously covered the entire Thousand Demons sacred realm was now all projected onto the outline of the Star Moon Palace. Pillars of starlight transcended time and space and landed on the Chitty River. The pillars of starlight were first twisted into knots before rushing into the outline of the Star Moon Palace. In just a few breaths' time, a huge object whose entire outline could not be seen clearly appeared above the Chitty River. This huge object was completely condensed from the brilliance of the moon and stars. Countless huge spots of light swam wantonly within it. Every time it moved, a majestic desolation aura would rush into the Thousand Demons sacred realm. Wherever this desolation aura passed, hundreds of miles of space would be penetrated, forming a chaotic layer that isolated the Star Moon Palace from the Thousand Demons sacred realm. Senior, is this the Star Moon Palace? Seeing that the Star Moon Palace had appeared, but it was not what he had imagined at all, Xueqi could not help but ask, "Why? Can't I see the palace door?" "I can't see the palace either." Xueqi replied indifferently, "Who told you that the Star Moon Palace must be a palace? Who told you that something named by Fairy Xing you must have a plaque of the Star Moon Palace?" "Sigh, I understand now." Xueqi sighed. This Star Moon Palace might not be a palace at all. It might not be. However, it's most likely still a palace. Xueqi replied. "When we first entered, the Star Moon Palace already looked like a palace. Otherwise, why would Fairy Xingyu name this object the Star Moon Palace? Moreover, there are also halls inside the Star Moon Palace. What about the palace door?" Xueqi smiled bitterly. "Without the palace door, how do we enter?" "Don't be anxious, don't be anxious," Xueqi said unhurriedly. "The entrance will appear eventually. It's just a matter of time." That's true. Why should I be anxious?" Xueqi nodded. "Indeed," Xueqi replied casually. "You're not anxious, but the eunuch is." "What?" Xueqi was stunned. He did not quite understand. "It's nothing." Xueqi was slightly taken aback. He then explained, "This is a saying from my hometown." "Oh." Seeing that Xueqi did not explain further, Xueqi responded and released his divine thought. However, when his divine thought touched the chaotic layer of space, it was immediately shattered by the space. He could not pass through it at all. At the edge of the space, the desolation aura was abnormally dense. This Star Moon Palace really looks like an ancient relic. At this point, Xueqi no longer had any doubts about the origins of the Star Moon Palace. This was because he could clearly see with his naked eye that this Star Moon Palace was somewhat similar to Panga's axe. What the Star Moon Palace had revealed earlier was not a real palace, but an illusory silhouette. Only after the pillar of light from the stars and moon had fallen did it solidify into a real body. Seeing this, Xueqi had some understanding. Wasn't Panga's axe the same? On the Desolation continent, Panga's axe was just an illusory silhouette. Only in the 3 continents would Panga's axe become a real body. Of course, the Star Moon Palace was on the other side of a chaotic layer of space. If this layer of space disappeared, the complete Star Moon Palace would definitely be revealed. Xueqi and Xueqi were fully focused on observing the Star Moon Palace. The other forces were also rubbing their palms together. The disciples of Zhai Xinglu had already flown behind Xueqi and Xueqi, lining up in the formation they had rehearsed earlier, waiting for the right time. In the distance, the disciples of the 4 great clans were also waiting in formation, waiting for the Star Moon Palace to make a move. Behind the 4 great clans and the Star Moon Palace, the 100 schools of thought, which were Confucian cultivators, were also eyeing covetously. The Star Moon Palace was huge. In other places, some Taoist cultivators, some Buddhist protectors, and most of the great demons of the demon clan released their remarkable abilities, waiting for the Star Moon Palace to open. Fairy Xingyu flew to Xueqi's side and said softly, "So far, I haven't seen anything unusual, no." Xueqi shook his head. "The power of the stars and moon this time is too strong. The spatial barrier around the Star Moon Palace is also too thick. I'm afraid it won't be easy to pass through." "Humph, isn't it that 7 stars great sage from the Great Sage Hall?" Fairy Xingyu gritted her teeth in hatred. He didn't become a sage earlier or later, but he actually became a sage at this juncture. Moreover, not only did he trigger the 7 stars transit, but he also triggered the 10,000 stars transit after entering the Great Sage Hall. Of course, this greatly increased the strength of the 1,000 Demons Sacred Realm, but it also triggered too much of the power of the stars and moon in the 3 continents. Xueqi did not complain like Fairy Xingyu. Instead, he said softly, "We can pass through this spatial barrier easily, but the disciples of Zhai Xinglu and those cultivators who are sensitive to the power of the stars and moon will be in trouble." "What are you afraid of?" Fairy Xingyu pursed her lips and smiled. She looked as if she had a card up her sleeve. She said, "If it was the last time, we would naturally have to worry and waste our dermic powers. But this time, we don't have to worry at all." Although Fairy Xingyu did not look at Xiao Hua smiled bitterly. Before Xueqi could speak, he said, "Seniors, you don't have to worry about this. Leave it to me. I'll keep them in the Kunlun mirror first and release them after they enter." "There's another problem," Fairy Xingyu said worriedly. "I'm afraid that we won't be able to find a pavilion in the Star Moon Palace where we can use storage bags. That'll be troublesome." Xiao Hua was stunned and asked curiously, "Senior, do you mean there's no way to use imperial weapons or magic treasures like the Heaven and Earth bracelet in the Star Moon Palace?" "Of course." Fairy Xingyu smiled bitterly. "I don't know why the Star Moon Palace is so strange. Even among the immortals. Sigh, it seems that there are very few such restrictions. Let's keep these cultivators in the Kunlun mirror first." Xueqi ordered without hesitation. "Although the Starry Sky Maze is difficult, we have a 20% chance of success. Including them, it's only 40%. Now that Xiao Hua is with us, even if he has a 10% chance, it's still 30%. It's best if these cultivators can come out. If they can't, then they can't." "Okay." Xiao Hua nodded and said to Fairy Xingyu, "Fairy, come with me and let those disciples of Zhai Xinglu enter my Kunlun mirror." "Okay." Fairy Xingyu responded and was about to turn around and fly back. Whoa. A gust of wind suddenly whistled. In the distance where the demon clan had gathered, a great demon that was at least 10,000 feet in size suddenly flapped its wings and pounced toward Xingyu Palace, wanting to take the lead. "Damn it!" Fairy Xingyu paused and raised her right hand. A halo of stars appeared on her right index finger. However, Fairy Xingyu was still a little too slow. Just as she was about to point it out, the great demon had already rushed into the chaotic space. Swoosh! The great demon's body landed. Dazzling starlight shone from the great demon's body as it rushed into the space. The great demon's body instantly expanded by more than 30%. In just a few breaths, the great demon's body had completely disappeared into the space. At this moment, wherever the great demon's body passed, starlight shone and traces of its flight were clearly visible. What puzzled Xiao Hua and the others was that although the great demon seemed to be approaching the Star Moon Palace in an arc, what was revealed in the chaotic interlayer space was actually a complicated bow knot. Chapter 4502. When the great demon flew into the middle of the chaotic mezzanine, the light from his body was suddenly extinguished. His body, which had expanded previously, rapidly shrank at the same time and returned to its original size in the blink of an eye. Not only that, but in the next few breaths, the great demon's body continued to shrink until it was only 30% of its original size. "Humph, you're courting death." Fairy Xingyu's expression was cautious at first, but when she saw the great demon's body shrink, a sneer appeared on her face. She said to Xiao Hua, "Let's go. There's no need to look anymore. The door to the Star Moon Palace has not been opened yet. If you go in now, you'll only die." Xiao Hua nodded and retreated steadily. His gaze was still fixed on the great demon. Sure enough, Xiao Hua had only flown a few dozen feet when the great demon's body and mind suddenly swayed in the spatial mezzanine. Like a kite that had lost its string, it kept tumbling in the wind. Every time it tumbled, the great demon's body shrank. When it had shrunk to the size of a few dozen feet, it turned into a shadow and fell into the Chitty River. Unfortunately, there were no waves on the Chitty River. Who knew what kind of spatial crevice this reckless great demon had fallen into? "You want to enter the Star Moon Palace before my Zhai Xinglu? What a joke!" Fairy Xingyu said hatefully. If the Star Moon Palace was so easy to enter, would the 4 aristocratic families let my Zhai Xinglu enter first? Xiaohua smiled faintly and did not agree. He was still wondering why the spatial mezzanine was so strange. Fairy Xingyu ordered, and the disciples of Zhai Xinglu obeyed. Xiaohua took out the Kunlun mirror and activated his dermic powers to send the disciples into the Kunlun wonderland. Gongshu Isin, Gongshu Yiming, and Mo Jianli naturally followed him in. However, they were in the Shenhua continent. Zhai Xinglu was now the center of attention. Everything that Xiaohua did fell into everyone's eyes. Seeing the disciples of Zhai Xinglu disappear, the disciples of the four aristocratic families smiled thought-provoking. While Xiaohua was casting his technique, Xueqi transmitted his voiceover from afar. Fairy Xingyu did not disturb Xiaohua and flew over. At that moment, the thick and massive silhouette of the Star Moon Palace began to move. The light of the stars and the moon that had previously condensed into the silhouette of the Star Moon Palace flowed like stars. High up in the sky, the light of the stars and the moon continued to fall, colliding with the flowing brilliance of the Xingyue Palace. A scene that was more dazzling than all the fireworks in the world was presented before everyone. The light fell into the chaotic interlayer in the middle, refracting layers of magnificent illusions. These illusions were like a fairyland, like the traces of a devil. Traces of unfathomable fluctuations were also emitted. The fireworks lasted for the time it took to brew a cup of tea before a saber-shaped brilliance strangely flashed past. Then, a cluster of waves rushed out from the Star Moon Palace. The fireworks were split in half by the saber light. The wave seeped out from the gap and a shadow that looked like the word convex was born from the fireworks. As soon as this shadow appeared, it immediately expanded along with the fluctuations. Layers upon layers of overlapping shadows rushed into the chaotic interlayer of space. What was very strange was that when this shadow entered the interlayer, it began to spiral and twist in the same way as when the great demon flew in. In just a moment, countless convex-shaped shadows began to spread throughout the entire interlayer of space. No one could tell which shadow was connected to which. Xiaohua. Xueqi called out in a deep voice. This is the door of the Star Moon Palace. Let's prepare to enter. Xiaohua had just kept the Kunlun mirror and flew to Xueqi and Fairy Xingyu's side. When he saw this situation, he naturally knew that the Star Moon Palace door had appeared. However, what Xiaohua had never expected was that this Star Moon Palace door was a little too strange, wasn't it? Not to mention that there was no lofty gatehouse, not to mention that there were no imposing flower pillars, there wasn't even the outline of the door. It was just a specious shadow. Of course, the way this shadow appeared was really annoying. The path that stepped into the shadow was filled with death. Xiaohua involuntarily cried out, "Ah? This is the so-called Star Moon Palace door? I've thought about it for a long time and looked forward to it for so many years. I really never dreamed that the Star Moon Palace door would be like this. Do you think that the palace door is all dignified? Do you think that the palace door is all carved beams and painted pillars?" Fairy Xingyu sneered. Don't you see that there are 9 other doors in the Immortal Palace? In addition to these 9 doors, there are also side doors and side doors. If an ordinary Confucian cultivator wants to enter the Immortal Palace, do you expect him to enter through the main door? Xiaohua touched his nose in boredom and said with a wry smile. Yes, cats have their own ways, and mice have their own ways. Could it be that the Star Moon Palace door is different from the usual one? In the eyes of the ancient god clan, we are indeed inferior to cats and mice. Fairy Xingyu sighed. However, after Fairy Xingyu finished speaking, Xueqi exclaimed in surprise, "Oh no! Xingyu, look, the light path of the palace door did not break through the spatial mezzanine. We are not even qualified to set foot in the palace door." How is that possible? Fairy Xingyu was shocked. She hurriedly looked over. Sure enough, countless convex light shadows covered the spatial mezzanine. However, these light shadows were all within the mezzanine, and none of them fell on the edge of the mezzanine. Damn it, damn it, damn it! Fairy Xingyu cursed angrily and flew toward the Chitty River. Xueqi looked at Xiaohua and slowed down a little. Xiaohua asked in a low voice, "Senior, what did it look like in the past?" In the past, the shadows of these palace doors came out from the spatial mezzanine. There were tens of thousands of shadows in the space. Xueqi explained in a low voice, "We only needed to rely on our celestial artifacts to find the correct shadows and the correct route. Now that the shadows of the palace door can't be seen, senior celestial artifacts can't work, right?" Xiaohua asked. Yes, that's right. Xueqi nodded and explained. As you can see, the waves that are emitted from the Star Moon Palace are left behind from the ancient times when the Star Moon Palace was being refined. It is different from the waves of Yuan Qi of the heaven and earth and the waves of the formation. When these fluctuations fall into the space of the Thousand Demons' sacred realm, they will collapse the nearby space, forming a kind of mezzanine. Within this mezzanine, there is a kind of disorderly chaos. There is no heaven-earth essence qi, no righteous qi, and only a little light from the stars and the moon. You saw it just now. When a 7th grade essence qi great demon falls into this space, it becomes an ordinary demonic beast. Not to mention our celestial artifacts, even immortal artifacts can't be activated here. In other words, the two seniors can't be sure which of these countless shadows of the palace door is the real one? Xiaohua frowned and immediately thought of the situation when he was searching for the entrance to the mysterious water palace on the Saint River. The entrance to the mysterious water palace was formed by the light shadows through a vortex. It looked different from the entrance to the Star Moon Palace, but in fact, they were similar. However, the palace door of the Star Moon Palace was more complicated and harder to find. These shadows of the palace door are all fake. Xueqi's expression did not change as he explained faintly. Only the door that appeared on the Star Moon Palace is the real one. What we are really looking for is the fluctuation that rushed out of the door. This fluctuation repels the disorderly chaos around it, forming a temporary passage. In this mezzanine space, only this passage is safe. Seniors, why didn't you tell me earlier? Xiaohua smiled bitterly. Otherwise, I could have thought of other ways, Fairy Xingyu said helplessly, because we have a probing celestial artifact. The previous few times, this space mezzanine was not a problem at all. I didn't expect that we can't even step into the Star Moon Palace's door this time. There are so many shadows of the palace door. Xiaohua looked around and secretly wondered if he should activate the Delusion Breaker Dharma Eye. After all, the Delusion Breaker Dharma Eye was a rather secretive divine ability. He did not want so many humans and demon clans to know about it for the time being. There are more than that. Fairy Xingyu smiled bitterly. There's more? Xiaohua was shocked. As expected, before he could finish his sentence, he saw the Star Moon Palace move again. The brilliance of the stars and moon that had condensed into the Star Moon Palace flowed again. The protruding door also moved. As it moved, another wave of fluctuation was generated from the door, crashing into the spatial mezzanine. Illusory palace doors that were exactly the same as the previous one appeared again. They either intersected or overlapped with the previous ones, causing the entire spatial mezzanine to become even more chaotic. Damn it! Fairy Xingyu could no longer bear it. She opened her mouth and spat out a palm-sized star shuttle. As soon as the star shuttle appeared, it immediately emitted bright starlight. Countless heaven and earth Yuan Qi rushed into it like a gust of wind. Fairy Xingyu formed a seal with one hand. This seal was so obscure that even someone as strong as Xiaohua could not understand it. When Fairy Xingyu's hand glowed with moonlight that resembled fireflies, she raised her hand and waved it. The moonlight fell into the star shuttle. Whoosh! The star shuttle was transparent and rushed into the sky. Whoosh! The star shuttle landed in the space mezzanine in front of Xiaohua and immediately exploded, turning into a starry sky that was thousands of miles in size. There were many stars twinkling in the starry sky. Each star corresponded to a shadow of a palace door within this 1,000 miles. Penetrate! Fairy Xingyu shouted softly. Every star extended a pillar of stars and shot into the space mezzanine. It seemed that Fairy Xingyu wanted to break through the space mezzanine by force. The pillar of starlight shot into the spatial mezzanine. Similar to the great demon from before, it expanded abruptly. However, after charging a few li, the pillar of starlight showed signs of dissipating. Moreover, the pillar of starlight started to bend, and its entire trajectory condensed into a knot of light. Disregarding the fact that the knot of light was intermittent, whether Xiaohua and the others could safely reach the correct palace door phantom after charging through the pillar of starlight. Based on the fact that the pillar of starlight had turned into stardust after charging a few more li, Xiaohua understood that given immortal Xingyu's methods, she probably wouldn't be able to find the true palace door phantom. Xueqi, give me a hand. Fairy Xingyu shouted, unwilling to admit defeat. I don't believe it. Chapter 4503. Even if I can help you, I'm afraid we don't have enough time. Xueqi's face also showed disappointment as he replied bitterly. It will take too long for your star shuttle to rush into the spatial mezzanine. I'm afraid we won't be able to find the real palace door. The palace door of the Star Moon Palace has already closed. What? Xiaohua was shocked again. How long will the palace door of the Star Moon Palace last? Why didn't you say so earlier? Xueqi did not explain to him. He only said, 2 hours at most, half an hour at least. Oh, there's still time. Xiaohua nodded and asked again. If this junior can find the general area, senior will be able to activate the star shuttle, right? You can determine the general area? Fairy Xingyu was overjoyed. This junior will try. Xiaohua nodded. However, this junior can't guarantee it. Xiaohua, you are indeed our savior. Fairy Xingyu shouted, Xueqi, your divination technique is really accurate. Seniors, get ready. Xiaohua said in a low voice as he looked around. On the entire Crimson Ground River, tens of thousands of humans and demons were watching the three of them perform a one-man show. By the way, Senior, you can also ask the 4 great families and the great demons to think of a way. We can't always be the vanguard. Xiaohua thought of a way to distract them and whispered to Fairy Xingyu. Fairy Xingyu nodded and said, yes, they used to follow Zhai Xinglu and drink soup. Now, let them do something. After saying that, Fairy Xingyu flew up into the sky and sent a voice transmission to the 4 great families, the Confucian cultivators, and the great demons of the demon clan. Xiaohua nodded at Xueqi and the 2 of them flew closer to the spatial mezzanine. Xueqi waved his hand and the exploded star shuttle was restored. The dim starlight fell into his hand. Xiaohua stopped and turned his head to look. Under Fairy Xingyu's voice transmission, the 4 great families and the Confucian cultivators were also a little flustered. They gathered together to discuss, while the great demons of the demon clan rushed into the mezzanine one after another. They each found a direction and activated their innate divine abilities, trying to find the real palace door. Senior, Xiaohua whispered, please protect this junior. I don't want others to see my divine abilities. All right. Without another word, Xueqi raised his arms high into the sky and spread his 5 fingers. Like a peacock spreading its tail, lightning immediately enveloped the surrounding hundreds of miles. Inside the thunder, Xiaohua slapped his forehead. A ghostly green light flashed and the delusion breaker eye slowly opened. Hiss! Xiaohua couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air when he saw everything through the illusion breaker eye. In front of Xiaohua's eyes was an incomparably huge golden color. This golden color made Xiaohua's delirium transcendence eye sour. Within the golden light, an irregular orange hole that looked like a hole was slowly moving. The orange hole radiated a tri-colored flow. This flow was like a spring rushing into a grayish-black flowing wave. The flowing wave was shaking violently. Clusters of green and silver flashed constantly. The tri-colored flow created a faintly discernible passageway in the flowing wave, and then dissipated within the flowing wave. Over there, Xiaohua whispered to Xueqi. However, the illusory image of the palace door is changing from time to time. All right. Xueqi's face was still calm as he replied via voice transmission. As long as you can roughly determine the range. After saying that, Xueqi turned around and sent a voice transmission to Fairy Xingyu. Fairy Xingyu was currently saying something to the Shiman family. She did not expect Xiaohua to be able to determine the location in such a short period of time. Therefore, without another word, she immediately teleported to Xiaohua's side. Fairy Xingyu's actions naturally attracted the attention of the 4 great families. While they were discussing, they were also watching the movements of Xiaohua and the others. Xueqi sent a voice transmission to Fairy Xingyu. The 2 of them exchanged opinions and then led Xiaohua to the location of the illusory image of the palace door. At this moment, some great demons of the demon clan had already begun to force their way into the spatial mezzanine. There were also some Confucian families and heavenly kings of the Buddhist sect who had made preparations. They activated their imperial equipment or heavenly eyes to explore the spatial mezzanine. They saw the illusory image of the palace door. At this time, because the Star Moon Palace had moved again, there were already more than 10,000 illusory images of the palace door within 100 miles. Xiaohua thought for a moment and said, Senior Su, please continue to protect me. I will activate my divine ability first. After I have some clues, can you activate your magic treasure? No need. Xueqi shook his head and said, save your magic power first. There are still places in the Star Moon Palace that need your help. Here, according to our previous discussion, Fairy Xingyu and I will take action. Yes, Xueqi is right. Fairy Xingyu also nodded and said, there are many places that rely on the power of thunder. It's better for you to save your strength. With that, Fairy Xingyu nodded at Xueqi and said, you go first. I will activate it later. Let's find the right palace door first. Xiaohua hurriedly sent a voice transmission. Fairy, just follow the direction I know. There's no need to search anymore. What? This time, even Xueqi was shocked. Your divine ability can actually see through the space that is close to chaos? It seems like it. Xiaohua nodded. Seeing that a few heavenly kings from the Buddhist sect were also coming over, he said, let's hurry up and take action. Otherwise, the Buddhist sect will take the lead. All right. Xueqi nodded. He raised his hand and took out a broken beast-shaped jade piece. The beast shape looked similar to the Luna beast in the Bright Moon Palace. However, it was broken and one could not see its full appearance. Xueqi opened his mouth and a water-blue thunderbolt fell into the jade piece. The entire jade piece emitted a blue brilliance. Boom! The moonlight that had originally fallen into the Star Moon Palace split into a pillar of moonlight and fell into the jade piece. Then, a broken outline of the Luna beast appeared in front of Xiaohua. It is indeed the Luna beast. Xiaohua understood. Xueqi explained, this is an ancient relic I obtained when I was patrolling the borders of a forbidden area. I don't know its specific power, but I can barely activate the moonlight within it. Xingyue, come and lend me a hand. Once Xiaohua confirms the correct phantom image of the palace door, we will connect this pillar of starlight to that phantom image. If that's the case. Fairy Xingyu bit her lip and said softly, won't the people from the 4 aristocratic families take advantage of us again? The Star Moon Palace was meant for them to take advantage of us. Xueqi scolded without holding back. Furthermore, at this point, why are you still thinking about this? There. Since he was not afraid of others taking advantage of them, Xiaohua did not hide it anymore. He raised his hand and pointed at the spot where the tricolored brilliance had disappeared. Fairy Xingyu looked over. Indeed, there were several palace door shadows at the place where Xiaohua had pointed. Fairy Xingyu's face turned solemn. She slowly formed a seal with both hands. Layers of mist-like brilliance appeared in the surrounding void. When a low rumbling sound was heard, Fairy Xingyu raised her hand again. It was as if she was holding a heavy object in her hand. Then, she slowly dropped it toward the Luna Beast's shadow. Squeak! The Luna Beast's shadow made a sound that Xiaohua was familiar with. Then, the shadow started to solidify. Xueqi did not dare to delay. He opened his mouth and a mouthful of blood essence mixed with silver light fell into the Luna Beast's brilliance. Then, he pushed the blood essence along Xiaohua's moving finger. Boom! The Luna Beast immediately moved and rushed into the interlayer of space. In the chaotic interlayer of space, the Luna Beast's body could not help but spread out. However, there was a swaying tail behind it. The starlight in the tail was so bright that it dispersed the chaotic aura. Let's go! When Xiaohua saw the passageway appear, he hurriedly urged his body to rush in. However, Xueqi said in surprise, don't be hasty. The palace door shadow has appeared before. Senior. Xiaohua smiled and said, the palace door shadow is just a facade. When Xueqi heard this, he could not help but laugh. Then, he held his forehead and said, I have fallen into a habitual mindset. Habitual mindset? Xiaohua did not understand what Xueqi meant. However, before he could ask further, Xueqi turned his head and said, Xingyu, follow behind me. Xiaohua, you stay at the back and protect me. Yes, Senior. Xiaohua nodded. Xueqi stood up, and layers of strange markings appeared on his body. These markings rushed into the air and turned into tadpole-like runes, and when the runes flashed, a layer of dragon scale-like armor appeared around Xueqi's body. There were many lightning runes on this armor, and an indescribable aura was emitted from the armor. Looking at Fairy Xingyu, the marks also fell off her body and arms. A layer of soft armor that was engraved with many mysterious runes was also revealed. This soft armor was covered in starlight. Whoosh! Xueqi's body swayed and a thunderbolt crashed into the star mark. He chased after the moon beast. Fairy Xingyu turned her head and looked at Xiaohua. She was a little surprised that Xiaohua did not take out any Dharma treasure or armor to protect himself. However, she did not have time to say more. She only nodded and signaled Xiaohua to be careful. Then, she turned into a ray of starlight and chased after him. The two immortals flew into the passageway and immediately emitted strange lights and shadows. The lights and shadows seemed to be extremely long and wide at the same time. An aura was emitted from the passageway like a tidal wave. Xiaohua took a deep breath and activated the vital energy in his body. Buzz buzz. Countless sword hairs appeared on the surface of his body. When he turned into a sword, Xiaohua also flashed and rushed into the passageway. Quick! The actions of the three naturally attracted the attention of the Confucian cultivators from the four aristocratic families. Dongfeng Yushan waved his hand without hesitation and said, "According to the agreement with Zhai Xinglu, let's go in." Yes. The disciples of the Dongfeng family responded happily. They formed a group and flew toward the Chidi River. The starry sky passageway, which was dozens of feet wide, became bigger and bigger and expanded in all directions. Before the disciples of the Dongfeng family arrived, the Buddhist sect's guardians, who had been paying attention to Xiaohua and the others, had already arrived. They also activated their bodies without hesitation and entered the passageway. Chapter 4505. Damn it! Dongfeng Yushan cursed under his breath. The four aristocratic families followed behind Zhai Xinglu, which was a form of order and a form of respect. Now that the Buddhist sect had broken it, the Dongfeng family felt as if they had lost all face. However, Dongfeng Yushan only cursed once before his gaze fell on the spatial mezzanine again. Within the spatial mezzanine, a streak of lightning, a streak of starlight, and a streak of sword light formed a knot-like trajectory within the spatial mezzanine. They were already nearing the shadow of one of the palace doors. Go! Dongfeng Yushan was just about to raise his hand to give the order when suddenly, an unfamiliar face emerged from the crowd of Confucian cultivators in the distance. A black and white halo appeared around the unfamiliar cultivator as he instantly passed by Dongfeng Yushan's side and charged straight into the passageway. Humph! Seeing the cultivator's figure pass by him, Dongfeng Yushan snorted coldly and raised his hand slightly. Boom! A pillar of qi condensed into a chain and wrapped around the light figure. Little child. An old cold-blooded voice suddenly sounded in Dongfeng Yushan's ears. Don't be nosy. I don't want to make things difficult for the four aristocratic families today. As he spoke, a streak of black and white brilliance fell between the chains. That brilliance was like a key and the entire chain collapsed in the blink of an eye. At the place where the brilliance landed, the fluctuations of a Dao sect spell arrogantly spread in all directions. Grand Mist Ancestor. Dongfeng Yushan was shocked and screamed wildly in his heart. Why is he here at Xingyue Palace? While Dongfeng Yushan was still in shock, the Grand Mist Ancestor had already charged into the passageway, transforming into a black and white brilliance as he charged towards the shadow of the palace doors. Quick, quick, quick! Don't delay. Although Dongfeng Yushan was intimidated by the Grand Mist Ancestor, he knew that this old monster was definitely not someone he could deal with. Since the Grand Mist Ancestor did not want to create unnecessary trouble, he must have entered Xingyue Palace for something important. There was no need for him to find trouble with the Grand Mist Ancestor. He hurriedly urged his disciples. This time is different from the past. Although the Zhai Xinglu disciples did not take up too much time, we still might not have enough time. Following the entrance of the Dongfeng family, more and more great demons of the demon clan noticed this place. They followed suit and gave up on their own efforts to pounce on this place. The Luna beast that was formed from the jade piece dashed into the void. As it went deeper into the void, its body became fainter and fainter. Xueqi was following behind the Luna beast. Seeing the shadow appearing again, he started to panic. At this moment, he was already in a hopeless situation, and he could only fight for survival while facing death. There was absolutely no room for retreat. As a result, a ball of blue lightning began to brew between Xueqi's eyebrows. Xueqi's worries were not unfounded. Although the ancient jade piece could break through the layers of space, When it was only a few feet away from the shadow of the palace door, the entire shadow of the Luna Beast was reduced to a faint line. Chup chup. The Luna Beast let out a few low cries, and the line turned into nothingness. A jade piece that had lost its luster fell from the sky. Before Xueqi could catch it, the jade piece had already turned into powder and disappeared. Xueqi did not have time to think. He turned his hand and tapped the space between his eyebrows. Gotcha. A huge thunderbolt condensed into a lightning pillar and struck forward. When the lightning pillar landed in the chaotic void, it immediately became bony and became as thick as a thumb. The horned dragon from before had now become an earthworm, and it struggled to drill into the shadow of the palace door. Although Xueqi was an immortal, his physical body was not that of an immortal. Similarly, he was not as strong as the great demon of the demon clan from before. Xueqi did not dare to take the risk himself and could only wait for the lightning pillar to pass through the void. Xueqi, move aside. Behind Xueqi, Fairy Xingyu's delicate voice chased after him. A beam of starlight shot out from Fairy Xingyu's eyes, went past Xueqi, and pounced on the void that was destroyed by the lightning pillar. Roar roar roar. The lightning pillar wrapped around the starlight and sped up. In just a few breaths, it had landed on the moving shadow of the palace door. Whoa! Where the starlight landed, the shadow of the palace door stopped moving. The waves on it immediately passed through and rushed into the starlight corridor. Xueqi felt his vision blur, and layers of untainted land were once again introduced into his mind. Phew! Xueqi let out a long sigh. This strange situation was exactly what he had seen when he had rushed into the illusory shadow of the palace door. At this point, all the changes had been overcome. Things had returned to the original track that he and Fairy Xingyue had planned. Let's go. Xueqi raised his hand and waved. The star shuttle in his hand rushed into the shadow of the palace door like a meteor. His body was still like a thunderbolt, following the star shuttle closely. Xueqi had gone. Fairy Xingyu was delighted. She turned to look at Xiaohua, who was following behind her, and could not help but feel emotional. If Xiaohua had not found the correct shadow of the palace door and urged him, even if Xueqi had used the ancient jade slip, it would have been impossible for him to connect the shadow of the palace door to the starlight corridor in time. Be careful. There may be chaotic storms ahead. Fairy Xingyu reminded him and sped up, following behind Xueqi. Xiaohua nodded. With a flash of sword light, he also entered the shadow of the palace door. Behind Xiaohua, the waves of starlight that were as brilliant as fireworks rushed all the way to the edge of the spatial mezzanine. Boom! The moment the shockwave rushed out, a huge protruding star mark appeared in the night sky above the Crimson River. This star mark was several miles in size and had many folds of light, just like a huge palace gate. Let's go! At this time, the disciples of the Dongfang family had already entered. The disciples of the Shimin family, the Nangong family, and the Baiming family were preparing. When they saw the expected door appear, they did not wait any longer. They each chose a direction and entered at the same time. The four great clans had just entered the passageway when the Star Moon Palace moved again. However, this time, there was a link at the palace door that was connected to the Thousand Demons' sacred realm. When the Star Moon Palace moved, the passageway that was condensed from starlight also moved. The passageway was also pulled by the almost chaotic interlayer of space. Although it moved, the aura in the chaotic space rushed into the starlight passage through the gaps in the starlight again. Whoosh! Like a real storm, the chaotic aura rushed out from all parts of the passage without any pattern. Xueqi and Fairy Xingyu were already experienced. When they saw that the starlight passage was somewhat entangled, they immediately became vigilant. As they released their divine senses, they immediately dodged when they sensed signs of a storm. As for Xiaohua, his flying technique was not inferior to Xueqi's and Fairy Xingyu's, so he was even more sensitive to approaching danger. In particular, when the chaotic aura passed through the starlight passage, Xiaohua instantly felt a sense of familiarity. Even if he did not use his divine senses, he could still dodge in time. Some distance behind Xiaohua were the Buddhist protectors who had rushed in first. They weren't as relaxed as Xiaohua and company. Seeing the chaos storm suddenly descend, the two sons of Buddha didn't have time to dodge. The chaos aura landed on their bodies. Boom, boom, boom. Their bodies suddenly expanded. Before they could react, their flesh and blood had already exploded, turning into dust and vanishing without a trace. The other Buddhist protectors who were lucky enough to dodge did not dare to be negligent. They did their best to activate their Buddhist clouds and rushed into the distance. After the Buddhist protectors, it was naturally the unfamiliar Taoist cultivator. At this time, the Taoist cultivator's forehead was filled with two colors, black and white. The black and white colors condensed into fine lines that connected the cultivator's two eyes. The left eye of the cultivator seemed to have no pupils and was only pure white. The right eye of the cultivator was completely filled with pupils and was only pure black. The cultivator's eyes were expressionless in the blink of an eye. However, when the cultivator flew past the chaotic storm, he looked at the light in the distance and said in the voice of the Grand Mist Ancestor, "This Taoist cultivator is indeed Xueqi. When did he become so powerful? He's a human Mahayana realm cultivator. Back then, this old man's cultivation was only at this level. How could he have cultivated to such a level in just a few hundred years? If he had such a cultivation level, how could he be suppressed in the Thousand Demons sacred realm? Right now, all the Confucian cultivators in the 100 schools of philosophers are talking about the profound yellow board, the Fortune Gate disciples, and the Grand Ascension stage human who streaked across the sky like a meteor. But who can tell me where he came from?" The Grand Mist Ancestor was almost muttering to himself, "Based on the clues we have now, he was the first to appear when I escaped. However, at that time, he was at the eye of the West Sea. Later, he appeared in the Yu province's Longevity town. If I'm not mistaken, he must have arrived at the Longevity town through the eye of the West Sea. Damn it, this bastard's luck is too good. There are so many spatial veins, and only a few people can come out alive. He just happened to be able to enter one of them. Sigh, if I had known that this Xueqi was so mysterious, I would have brought him out back then." The Grand Mist Ancestor was already regretting his decision. If I had subdued him back then, wouldn't he be my powerful right-hand man now? But now I've already offended him, and this enmity is not easy to mend. After that, I even let Taoist Master Qing Su and Master Heaven Flipping covet his forces in the soaring Dragon Mountain range. I don't even know if he's discovered it now. Of course, it was only for an instant, and the Grand Mist Ancestor said coldly, "Humph, so what if we fall out? Right now, the 3 continents are in turmoil, and heroes are emerging in large numbers. There are as many heroes as there are hairs on an ox in this chaotic world. But there is only one true emperor. With the Yin Yang Illustrated Handbook, it's only a matter of time before I recover to the peak of the Grand Ascension stage. Let me ask you, who in this world can be my opponent?" Xueqi is nothing more than a helper sent by the heavens to assist this old man in achieving hegemony. If he is tamed, then this old man doesn't mind giving him some benefits. If he is unruly, then this old man also doesn't mind personally eliminating him. The so-called Fortune Gate is merely a gift given to this old man by the heavens. Chapter 4506. Haha. The Grand Mist Ancestor couldn't help but laugh at the thought of this. Black and white clouds rose around him and wrapped around his body as he charged toward the end of the starlight. However, the black-white cloud merely flew a few zhang away. Swoosh. Another chaos storm came crashing down. The Grand Mist Ancestor was so pleased with himself that a corner of the black-white cloud was swept away by the chaos storm. The black-white cloud was like a bubble in the chaos storm, and it was blown away in an instant. The Grand Mist Ancestor's figure was revealed, but one of his legs was missing. Damn it! The Grand Mist Ancestor hurriedly retreated. His pair of black and white eyes stared ahead as he felt a little vexed. Why do I feel so impatient? It's better to be careful. Xueqi is a human Grand Ascension stage cultivator, so there's nothing to fear. However, the Star Moon Lord is a mysterious figure who can't be underestimated. Moreover, who is that cultivator beside the Star Moon Lord? It seems that even Xueqi has to treat him with respect. Could he be a Grand Ascension stage cultivator as well? That's impossible. How could there be so many Grand Ascension stage cultivators in my absence? See, could it be him? Thinking of this, the Grand Mist Ancestor hurriedly withdrew the black and white fog, revealing his body. His previous arrogance disappeared without a trace, and his black and white eyes revealed a strange expression as he stared at the distant starlight. He pondered, how could I forget about him? However, with his lifespan and strength, it's impossible for him to undergo tribulation. He should have died tens of thousands of years ago. Of course, I can't rule out the possibility that he had some fortuitous encounter that allowed him to preserve his primordial spirit and become undying like me. If it's him, I have to be careful. His abilities are strange and he has countless tricks up his sleeves. I owe him a debt of gratitude for his guidance. Perhaps I should treat him with respect. Humph. What respect? If it's really him, then this old man should ask him why he didn't save this old man when he was clearly alive and saw this old man being suppressed in the eye of the West Sea. Why didn't he save me when he knew that I was being suppressed by the combined forces of the immortals, Buddhas, and demons? As a senior of the Tao Gate, he doesn't have the slightest awareness of a senior. He doesn't even care about the Tao Gate's disciples. What right does he have to be a senior of the Tao Gate? If this old man sees him, I'm going to question him in person. The more the Grand Mist Ancestor thought about it, the angrier he got. He had long forgotten about the him who had taught him, and the righteousness of reviving Taoism was on his lips. However, even if that was what the Grand Mist Ancestor thought, he didn't dare to question Xueqi. If Xueqi was really him, the Grand Mist Ancestor understood that Xueqi's divine ability could be withstood by those around him. The Grand Mist Ancestor wouldn't dare to appear in front of Xueqi. Therefore, even though the Grand Mist Ancestor had sensed the Dongfeng family's disciples chasing after him, he did not dare to rush towards the Star Moon Palace. Even Xueqi and the others didn't dare to underestimate the power of the Chaos Storm. Even the Grand Mist Ancestor wasn't spared, not to mention the other cultivators. Most of the disciples of the four great clans who had rushed in first were caught off guard when they saw the chaotic windstorm falling. The lucky ones naturally saw the windstorm brushing past them and broke out in a cold sweat. The unlucky ones could only watch as the windstorm fell. Not to mention their physical bodies being destroyed and their bones turning into powder. Even the sub-bodies that had been brewing for a long time were destroyed by the windstorm. They first turned into vital energy, then merged with the chaotic aura and turned into nothingness. Naturally, there were some Confucian cultivators who weren't willing to die. Most of them had imperial weapons in their hands or on them. Their tone wasn't inferior to the Immortal Palace's imperial weapons. However, as the chaos storm brushed past, any imperial weapon lost its luster and any material turned into scrap metal. In the time it took to brew a cup of tea, 20% of the disciples of the four great families had already fallen. Change formation and advance. Dongfeng Yushan saw that the situation in the Starlight Passage was more dangerous than he had expected. He didn't dare to delay and hurriedly transmitted his orders. Unfortunately, within the Starlight Passage, his strength of a mere 7th-level origin power martial grandmaster wasn't enough. No one could hear him. Dongfeng Yushan had no choice but to shout at the top of his lungs. Fortunately, the Dongfeng family's foundation was rare in the hidden immortal continent. The disciples who were selected to enter the Star Moon Palace were mostly elites of the human race. They still had the ability to remain calm in the face of danger. When they heard Dongfeng Yushan's orders, they immediately stabilized and hurriedly changed their formation. In a scattered star formation, they advanced inwards. If the Dongfeng family could do this, the Shimin family, Nangong family, and Baiming family could do the same. The four great families occupied the entire Starlight Passage and rushed towards the Star Moon Palace. Compared to the four great families, the Confucian cultivators of the 100 schools of philosophers were slightly inferior. However, the human race was strong in unity and order. Although nearly 30% of the disciples had fallen in the chaos storm, they still stubbornly advanced towards the Star Moon Palace. Compared to the human race, the great demons of the demon race were far inferior. They also had some allies, but not many. When they saw the door of the Star Moon Palace appear and the human race begin to enter in an orderly manner, they became anxious and swarmed towards the door. The more impatient ones had already bypassed the human cultivators and subconsciously flew in among them. The more meticulous ones waited for the human race to finish entering before finding some great demons to enter with them. Of course, this disorder had its advantages and disadvantages. The advantage was that the chaos storm fell. Due to the disorder of the great demons, they were scattered all over the passage and the chances of being hit by the chaos storm were not very high. However, it was also this disorder that slowed down the speed of entering the passage. Not long after, the Star Moon Palace moved again and the chaos storm fell again. There were no surprises at all. Under the aura of chaos, The great demons of the demon race first emitted dazzling starlight and their bodies rapidly expanded. Then, without waiting for their bodies to come into contact with the starlight passage, boom! Every bit of flesh and blood in the great demons' bodies exploded. This exploded flesh and blood separated from the starlight and immediately turned into nothingness. Go, go, go! The great demons of the demon race were all terrified. They scrambled to fly towards the Star Moon Palace with all their might. It was inevitable that the passage would be somewhat chaotic. However, it was fortunate that this was not the first time that the Confucian cultivator clans had entered. They were already prepared and gave up part of the space to avoid the great demons. After a full hour, there were no longer any traces of humans or demons on the Crimson Earth River. Although the moon and stars were still bright, and the night wind was blowing, the endless loneliness was still spreading in all directions, even more endlessly than the aura of primordial times. At this moment, the area of 100,000 miles around the Star Moon Palace was filled with endless whirlpools of wind blades. Although the appearance of the Star Moon Palace only triggered the aura of chaos within 1,000 miles, the changes in heaven and earth caused by the Star Moon Palace were not limited to this. Although the wind blades formed small whirlpools, there was a huge whirlpool that surrounded the entire Star Moon Palace. Xueqi and the others were inside the whirlpool and could not sense it. However, the demon race inside the whirlpool could sense that even if they released their primordial thoughts could not come within 100,000 miles. Even immortal Emperor Go Chen's supreme heavenly mirror and Mahavairakana revered world's divine ability could not see what was happening within 100,000 miles. Although Xueqi did not know that so many things were happening in the passageway behind him, he could guess with his heels. Although he was flying at the front, he had encountered more than a dozen chaotic storms within the Starlight Passage, and had even narrowly crashed into them several times. As such, he was well aware of the tragic fate of the Confucian cultivators behind him. Xueqi saw the brilliance of the stars and the moon, which was even larger than a mountain, filling the entire passageway. In the brilliance of the stars and the moon, there was even a protruding light pillar that was about to split the heavens and the earth. Xueqi understood that this was most likely the real door to the Star Moon Palace. Xueqi and Fairy Xingyu had already flown down to the light pillar. Both of them were wearing armor and had solemn expressions. Xueqi urged his body to slowly fly above the light pillar, as if he was checking the situation of the palace door. Fairy Xingyu, on the other hand, had a puzzled look on her face as she watched Xueqi fly over. "You actually know the swordsmanship of the Confucian cultivators?" Fairy Xingyu asked directly. "And you've even reached the sword transformation realm?" Xueqi said faintly. "Didn't I tell you before? In the Dawn Rain continent, there is a group of sword cultivators who specialize in swordsmanship. I have obtained their secret technique so I can transform into a sword." "Even if you can transform into a sword?" Fairy Xingyu shook her head again. "The body of the human clan is absolutely no match for magic treasures and armor. I don't understand why you don't wear armor to protect yourself. Don't tell me that you don't have armor in your Qiankuan bag." Fairy Xingyu is right. "I really don't have a suitable armor," Xueqi said with a smile, as if he had no intention of hiding it. "Humph, you're lying to me. Who would believe you?" Fairy Xingyu could only snort coldly. She was really helpless against Xueqi, who was stubborn. Xueqi shrugged and smiled bitterly. "I'm right. I don't know whether others believe it or not. Anyway, I don't believe anything you say," Fairy Xingyu said decisively. Xueqi did not expect Fairy Xingyu to believe him. He looked at the light pillar and asked, "Why aren't you going in? Are you waiting for an opportunity?" "Yes." Fairy Xingyu nodded. "The Star Moon Palace is an ancient divine object. With our cultivation, we can't go in easily. We have to wait until the Star Moon Palace moves. Xingyu." Xueqi's figure suddenly landed and he said anxiously, "The Star Moon Palace seems to be moving. Let's get out of the way first." "Okay." Fairy Xingyu did not dare to be negligent. She hurriedly followed Xueqi and flashed to the side of the light pillar. Xueqi naturally followed behind. As soon as the three of them stood still, the brilliance of the stars and the moon that filled the world began to vibrate slightly. Then, the aura that was as vast as the sea let out a low roar. The protruding light pillar began to flow with mysterious fine lines from top to bottom. The fine lines were extremely strange and exuded an unapproachable majesty. When the fine lines fell to the bottom of the light pillar, The entire light pillar swelled toward the passage like a bubble. Puff! The light pillar turned into an aura and rushed out, revealing a starry sky under the brilliance. Chapter 45:07. Let's go! Xueqi shouted, obviously reminding Xiaohua that Fairy Xingyu's figure had already flashed into the starry sky. Entering the Star Moon Palace was not too troublesome. Xiaohua only felt a strong primitive aura coming from all over the starry sky, making his mouth and nose feel very comfortable. Phew! Standing in the starry sky, Xueqi looked at the huge convex starry door behind him and the mottled light and shadow outside the starry door. He let out a long sigh and said, entering the Star Moon Palace has never been as difficult as this time. Yes. Fairy Xingyu looked at the void under her feet and the picturesque stars and moons around her and said, maybe it was too easy before and we didn't gain anything. Today's difficulty is the only way we can find the real passage. What was it like before? Xiaohua asked tentatively. In fact, Xiaohua had wanted to ask this question for a long time. However, seeing that Xueqi and Fairy Xingyu were unwilling to say more, Xiaohua understood that although the two immortals trusted him, they were still somewhat guarded against him. After all, they had been taught a lesson before him. Now, they only knew about the primordial chaos ancestor. Who knew what the primordial chaos ancestor was like before? Therefore, Xiaohua never asked too much about things that they did not want to say because he had a lot of things that he had not told them. It wasn't so complicated in the past. Xueqi replied faintly, before we came in, there were many illusory doors. We only needed to find the right one, activate the spirit shuttle, and let the spirit shuttle find the right passage. At that time, there were sometimes chaotic storms in the Starlight Passage, but not many. We were the first to come in and have encountered them more than 10 times. Based on our previous experience, 3 times is enough. Fairy Xingyu looked at the mottled starry door and gloated. This time, the 4 aristocratic families and the Confucian cultivators are unlucky. I'm afraid they will lose 50% of their disciples. In the past, only 10% of the great demons of the demon clan would die. This time, it will probably reach 30%. Xueqi nodded. After all, the chaotic storms have multiplied several times. Although their demon bodies are strong, under the chaotic aura, their demon bodies are like ants. Primordial chaos seems to be here. Fairy Xingyu thought for a while and finally reminded Xueqi. Xueqi's face sank as he nodded. Yes, I've already sensed his aura. Although his strength is not as strong as when he was at his peak, he has already refined the yin-yang illustration mirror and entrusted his primordial spirit to it. His divine powers are even stronger than before. Fairy Xingyu said again. Not bad. Xueqi turned his head to look at the huge stargate and said, after refining the yin-yang illustration book, he has the preliminary ability to reverse yin and yang. Moreover, he also used the power of the yin-yang illustration book to forcibly occupy the body of a Taoist cultivator. If there is no special magic, it is very difficult to recognize him. Unfortunately, a dog can't change its habit of eating shit. Some people would never do something in their lifetime, but some people would do it with a wave of their hand. Some people would rather die than think about something, but some people would take it for granted. Fuck. Fairy Xingyue glared at Xueqi with dissatisfaction and said, aren't you saying that I'm waiting for myself? That's right. Xueqi nodded solemnly. In this aspect, we can't compare to Xiaohua. Xiaohua was extremely embarrassed. He waved his hand and said, Senior, you think too highly of me. In a life-and-death situation, I will also take over someone else's body. You won't. Xueqi seemed to be more certain than Xiaohua. Xiaohua smiled bitterly and touched his nose. Senior seems to understand me better than I do. Because a cultivator like you is the darling of the heavenly Tao. How could the heavenly Tao bear to test you with such a cruel choice? Xueqi answered calmly, without any hint of jealousy in his voice. Senior, you're flattering me. Xiaohua disagreed. However, when he saw that Xueqi and Fairy Xingyue were not in a hurry to move forward, as if they were waiting for something, he asked again, by the way, why is the Hongmeng ancestor here? Does he also need to come to the Star Moon Palace to comprehend? I don't know either. Xueqi shook his head. Hongmeng is the most scheming. He came to the Star Moon Palace in his early years and disappeared from our sight. However, after he left the Star Moon Palace, he did not mention a word about what he saw in the Star Moon Palace. I have never interrogated him about this. He must have encountered something in the Star Moon Palace last time. This time, he wants to go and take a look. Hee, isn't that just right? Xuehua chuckled. Let's wait here and stop him first and interrogate him. Moreover, Xuehua originally wanted to say that he also had a grudge with the Hongmeng ancestor and wanted to ask about it. However, Xueqi shook his head and said, everyone has their own ambitions. Why force him? Moreover, Hongmeng's ambition is too big. He will burn himself sooner or later. Why should we be nosy? Looking at Fairy Xingyue's pursed lips, Xuehua nodded inwardly. He gave Xueqi a thumbs up in his heart. Only such a magnanimous cultivator was worthy of being an immortal. Only such a broad-minded immortal was worthy of being a law enforcer. Xuehua admitted that it was difficult for him to pardon someone who had harmed him. Let's go. Xueqi originally wanted to wait a little longer. However, when he heard Xuehua mention killing the Hongmeng ancestor, he did not want to wait any longer. He called out and rushed into the starry sky. Let's go. Fairy Xingyue was obviously like Xuehua. She wanted to make a fool out of the Hongmeng ancestor. However, she was helpless now. She shrugged and said, let's go through the meteor belt first. However, speaking of which, isn't it a little early to go through the meteor belt? Xueqi did not answer Fairy Xingyue. Fairy Xingyue chased after him resentfully. Xuehua also looked thoughtfully at the huge stargate and urged his body to follow the two immortals. The inside of the Star Moon Palace was incomparably huge and there were no restrictions that restricted divine sense. Xuehua tried to release his divine sense, but he could not reach the end of the Star Moon Palace. Moreover, the space of the Star Moon Palace was very strange. It was different from the three continents, the ruins, and the primitive continent. Xuehua had already tried, but he could not sense the Shunhua continent. Needless to say, the Kunlun mirror could not be used either. More importantly, Xuehua vaguely felt that the power of laws that imprisoned him on the three continents had somewhat disappeared. The power of the two immortals flying in front of him had quietly changed. Perhaps they had already broken free from the shackles of the ninth-grade essence force. It's worthy of being an ancient divine object. Xuehua could not help but sigh. The Star Moon Palace seems to have formed a world of its own. Even the laws are different. No wonder the space and the Kunlun mirror cannot be used. Only a divine object like this has a passageway to the immortal world. After Xuehua and the others left, a stream of light flashed above the stargate. First, a bald head poked in and then looked around. Then, a fat figure squeezed in. This Buddhist sect guardian looked very ordinary, but one of his eyes was black and the other white. The Buddhist sect guardian jumped into the starry sky and his fat body jumped a few times on the spot. He looked around blankly and then muttered to himself, so, the Star Moon Palace is like this. Where's the Star Moon Master who came in earlier? Where are the two Dao sect cultivators? After a while, there was no response from the silent starry sky. Only then did the Buddhist sect guardian smile. Looking at the place where Xuehua and the others had disappeared, the voice of the primordial chaos ancestor sounded from the guardian's mouth again. Hee, so they left long ago. Looks like that cultivator was not him. Humph, even if it was him, so what? The Yin-Yang Illustrated Handbook reverses Yin and Yang. Without the strength of an immortal, how could he discover the secret of the Yin-Yang Illustrated Handbook? Even if he stood in front of me now, he would not be able to discover my background. Ha 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 ha. With that said, the Grand Mist Ancestor also flew in the direction Su Zhifei had gone. However, beneath the Buddhist sect's protector's body, there were still Buddhist clouds beneath his feet. Even though there were faint traces of black and white clouds within the Buddhist clouds, Huang Xiaolong could still see them. One had to admit that the primordial chaos ancestor was a rare prodigy of the Tao. He fought against the immortals, Buddhas, and demons by himself. Of course, he was defeated in the end. However, even the Vairocana revered sovereign, immortal Emperor Go Chen, and the golden-winged Peng couldn't truly destroy him. They could only suppress him in the eye of the Western Sea. Moreover, he even managed to refine the yin-yang diagram that was suppressing him. Although he had just escaped and did not have much magic power, he was like a flood dragon entering the sea. Immortal Emperor Go Chan and the Vairocana revered sage were unable to find him. After the Grand Mist Ancestor left, no other Buddhist sect's enforcers came in. After the time it takes to brew a cup of tea, flashes of starlight flickered, and the four families' disciples rushed into the hall in a fluster. Of course, when everyone landed in the starry sky, they calmed down in a moment. There was no need for anyone to say anything. They stood in the starry sky and waited for the leaders of their respective clans to come in. Dongfang Yushan, Shimin Hengyue, Nangong Pingping, and Baiming Chi Han were the last to come in. They did not look at the surrounding starry sky, but at their respective disciples. Although they had expected it, when they saw the number of people in the group, their faces were still a little pale. Dongfang Yushan looked at Shimin Hengyue and the other two and sighed. Brothers, our task this time is considered a failure. Our Dongfang family has lost almost half of our disciples. I presume that the rest of you are about the same, right? Yes. Nangong Pingping said. I have already heard from my brother's introduction. According to them, entering the Star Moon Palace was not a big deal. Even if our luck was bad, it was impossible to lose 10% of our disciples. Now it is actually half. I don't know how to explain it when I return to the clan. Shimin Hengyue glanced at Dongfang Yushan and said, Brother Dongfang must have some plans. I won't hide it from you, brothers. I also wanted to come here when I came in. Our four great clans have been friends for generations, and we're not the same as the 100 schools of Confucianism. Our clans have always benefited both sides if we cooperate. Today's situation does not allow us to hesitate. I suggest that the disciples of our four great clans cooperate and recommend Brother Dongfang to be our leader. What do you think? Chapter 4508. This. Dongfang Yushan frowned slightly and declined. I want the four families to merge into one, but it's better for the four of us to discuss the decision together. Sigh, Brother Dongfang, why decline? Baiming Chi Han sighed. Exploring the Star Moon Palace isn't a particularly important matter. Brother Dongfang doesn't need to take any responsibility. We just need to do our job well and not let the sect punish us. That's good too. Dongfang Yushan nodded and looked around. Our four families still don't have enough disciples. Why don't we wait for those families that are on good terms with us and enter together? Nangong Pingping and the others looked at each other, then looked at the disciples of their respective families and nodded. Because the opportunities in the Star Moon Palace were different from ordinary opportunities, it didn't care about the number of people. No matter how many people there were, those who had opportunities would naturally be able to comprehend the power of literature and break through the bottleneck to become a literature saint. No matter how few people there were, if they didn't have opportunities, they would gain nothing. Seeing that no one had any objections, Dongfang Yushan discussed with the others in a low voice and quietly allowed the other disciples to enter. During this time, there were more great beasts from the demon race who came in one after another. When these great beasts entered, they were all ecstatic. Then, they looked at the humans who were waiting inexplicably and moved their bodies to different places in the starry sky. Seeing that these great beasts flew in different directions, Dongfang Yushan and the others looked at each other and smiled with disdain. Because, like the Grand Mist Ancestor, they were very clear that there were countless passages from the Star Moon Palace to the depths of the starry sky. However, until now, they only knew that the path to the meteor belt was the safest and had the least number of monsters. After the great beasts, the disciples of various families came in. Seeing the disciples of the four families waiting here, how could they not know why? Those who were related to the four families naturally came over, and those who weren't were also thinking of ways to get close or began to form an alliance according to the previous plan. Gongshu family, Murong family, Duanmu family, Huangfu family, Confucius family, and other families also began to gather around, ready to go. While the four aristocratic families were gathering their forces, Xiaohua had already followed Xueqi and Fairy Xingyue to the so-called meteor belt. According to Xiaohua's thoughts, the so-called meteor belt should be similar to the falling rock formation he had seen before. There would be many meteors shuttling back and forth in this area. If one wanted to pass through, they only needed to avoid the meteors and be careful. However, when he flew through the starry sky and arrived in front of a huge space, he realized that he had been too naive. The Star Moon Palace was a place that even the two banished immortals feared, so how could it possibly have a simple rockfall matrix? In front of Xiaohua was an extremely large space. This space was almost boundless and stretched across the starry sky in front of the three of them. There were a lot of spatial fragments in the space, and these fragments were constantly flying around recklessly. Xiaohua looked at it. These fragments were either in the shape of a long strip, or in the shape of a square, or in the shape of an irregular hexagram. However, when Xiaohua looked deeper into the space, there were even more fragments that didn't have any fixed shape. One moment they would condense into a circle, and the next moment they would condense into a sheet. The strangest thing was that there were lines that didn't have any shape flowing freely in the space. However, no matter the size or shape of the fragments, there was a layer of starlight flickering around these fragments. The starlight blocked Xiaohua's vision, so he couldn't see what was under the starlight. Xiaohua released his divine thought naturally, but as soon as his divine thought entered the space, it was immediately torn apart by several unknown forces. It was instantly torn apart, and an indescribable stabbing pain came from his Naiwen palace. The innate divine restriction outside his Naiwen palace actually couldn't stop this space from attacking his divine thought. When they were slightly closer, boom, boom, boom. Layers upon layers of ghostly wails and wolf howls came from the space. This sound of the wind was quite soul-stealing, causing Xiaohua to feel a chill run down his spine. The strangest thing was that within the space, there was also the aura of a violent wind blowing against his face. Strands of ripples also rushed over along with the aura. Xiaohua could easily distinguish that a portion of the aura and ripples were similar to the Thousand Demons' sacred realm, while a portion was similar to the ruins and the primeval continent. Of course, there was still a portion that Xiaohua did not know about. This. Xiaohua was dumbfounded. He whispered to Fairy Xingyu. Is this the meteor belt that Senior mentioned? Of course. Fairy Xingyu said proudly. Can't you see that there is starlight on these fragments? Moreover, these fragments are flowing in this space like water. Shouldn't they be called a meteor belt? All right. Xiaohua said helplessly. I thought the so-called meteor belt was similar to the star array. What? Fairy Xingyu said with a smile. Do you think this name is inappropriate? It's not that it's inappropriate. Xiaohua said with a bitter smile. I just think it's a little weird to call it a meteor belt. Then there's no other way. Fairy Xingyu said with a smile. I was the one who named the Star Moon Palace. Now, it's famous in the 3 continents. If you want to change it, I'm afraid it won't be easy. Senior, is there any danger in this meteor belt? Xiaohua ignored Fairy Xingyu's show and looked at Xueqi. Xueqi looked at the chaotic space and pointed at the space fragments with his hand. He said, these space fragments are different. Some are earth fragments, some are ocean fragments, and some are pure void fragments. If they are void fragments, there will be voids in different realms. After the human clan enters, most of our bodies will be destroyed by the chi of heaven and earth. Even if they are earth fragments, ocean fragments, or mountain fragments, there will be some strange beasts on them. Some of these strange beasts are from the immortal world, some are from the Demon League, and there are many that we don't know. If the human clan cultivators encounter them, they will most likely die. Xiaohua narrowed his eyes and looked at the fragments that had no rules. His heart was pounding. Xueqi then pointed at the space between the fragments and said, then there are these spaces. Divine sense can't enter these spaces. Even if our divine sense were to enter, it would be torn apart, let alone your divine sense. The reason why there is such a strange phenomenon is because these space fragments belong to different realms. The auras of different realms collide with each other in the space, forming an extremely strange cutting force. You must have sensed the aura within. Some are similar to the Thousand Demons' sacred realm, some are similar to the immortal realm and the Demon League. Most of them are ancient, desolate auras. Those are the fragments left behind when the Star Moon Palace was refined in ancient times. There are shattered desolate spaces on them. The chaotic intertwining of the auras of different realms will not only tear apart divine senses and extended thoughts, but also the bodies of the human clan. Therefore, we can't fly through this space for no reason. We can only find a gap in the chaotic aura and land in a safe space fragment. Then, we can cross this meteor belt step by step. Fairy Xingyu said with a smile. Of course, what if we are lucky enough to encounter a transmission channel in one of the spaces without having to pass through all the space fragments? I'm not that lucky. Xiaohua immediately said with a bitter face. Whenever I have to find a way out, I've always taken the furthest path. It's a thankless task. Hee hee. Fairy Xingyu covered her mouth and giggled. I thought you said you would be the luckiest. Xiaohua shrugged and asked Xueqi in bewilderment, Senior, if I didn't have the Kunlun mirror, would the disciples of the star-picking tower and the cultivators chosen to sense the power of the stars and moon also have to pass through this meteor belt? Xueqi naturally understood Xiaohua's doubts and explained. When Fairy Xingyu and I first discovered the Star-Moon Palace, we were the ones who entered. In addition to this meteor belt, we also went to many other places. Therefore, we have a good understanding of the Star-Moon Palace and the way to enter it. Therefore, most of the disciples chosen by Fairy Xingyu in the star-picking tower should be able to pass through the previous starlight passage smoothly. Entering the Star-Moon Palace is a kind of reward for them. As for what opportunities they will encounter, that is their own business. Therefore, generally speaking, after entering the Star-Moon Palace, Fairy Xingyu will let them go their own way and find their own path. The cultivators chosen to help us search for the power of the stars and moon will naturally have to follow us. When passing through this meteor belt, half of them will have no problem. The other half will not be able to pass through. Fairy Xingyu and I will use our magical powers to bring them over. That's impossible. Xiaohua looked at the space fragments floating in the sky like a mighty river and said in surprise, I don't even dare to say that I have full confidence in passing through this meteor belt. Senior, half of the cultivators you mentioned will be able to pass through? This time, we came at the wrong time. We might have come a little early or a little late. It's different from the previous times. Let's wait a little longer. It won't be long before the space vortex of this meteor belt stops. At that time, we will have a chance to pass through. Xueqi said faintly. He sat cross-legged in front of the starry sky. The lightning mark between his eyebrows flickered and appeared. A very mysterious fluctuation emerged from Xueqi's body and spread toward the vicinity of the meteor belt. When Fairy Xingyu saw this, she frowned and whispered, Xueqi, can your physical body withstand the expansion of thoughts? It doesn't matter. Xueqi said softly, I won't be using this physical body soon. There's no harm in trying. It's better to be careful. Fairy Xingyu said with concern, it's not the final moment yet. If something unexpected happens. Yes, I know. Xueqi nodded. I know what I'm doing. That. Xiaohua thought for a moment and whispered, Senior, if you don't have to worry, leave this task to me. Don't use the methods of the immortal world. Chapter 4509. You. Xueqi was a little skeptical and asked, what other magical powers do you have? This is the Star-Moon Palace. Let me try first. Xiaohua said with a smile. If I can do it, you don't have to waste. Extend thought. The corners of Xueqi's mouth curled into a faint smile as he said in a gratified manner. All right, you can try first. As he spoke, Xueqi withdrew his extend thought and looked at Xiaohua kindly. Even Fairy Xingyu had a grateful smile in her eyes. Xiaohua nodded slightly at the two immortals. He raised his hand and patted his forehead, opening his delusion breaker eye again. Seeing a green shadow flashing between Xiaohua's eyebrows, Xueqi and Fairy Xingyu looked at each other with a strange look in their eyes. Xiaohua opened his eyes, and everything in front of him changed again. What starry sky, what meteor belt, they all disappeared. In front of him was an incomparably huge space, and the space was filled with countless fragments of different splendors. These fragments seemed like dust, and also like crushed stones, floating in the countless fine lines that seemed like flowing water. The fragments were similar to the space fragments that Xiaohua had seen with his naked eye, but they were much smaller. As for whether each fragment was a continent or an ocean, Xiaohua's delusion breaker eye could not tell. As for the fine lines, they flowed at an extremely fast speed and were entangled with each other. Some fine lines even rushed into the fragments and shattered them. Not only were the brilliance of these fine lines different, but their thickness was also different. Some were as thin as hair, and some were as thick as threads. However, hundreds of millions of fine lines enveloped the entire space. In front of Xiaohua's eyes, there was a thin mist-like golden light that protected Xiaohua and the others. There were some strange runes in the golden light. These runes were like fine lines of light, and within the fine lines of light, smaller runes were engraved. This golden light covered the sky and the earth, separating it from the fine lines like flowing water in an orderly manner. Even in the distance of the meteor belt, it looked like the runes were also paved with golden light. Xiaohua looked around. The fine lines of the flowing water seemed to have no source and no end. On his left and right, two dim silvery white human-shaped lights flashed slightly. Xiaohua naturally knew that this silver-white humanoid brilliance was Xueqi and Fairy Xingyu. Therefore, he only glanced at them from the corner of his eye. He did not dare to look at them for too long. Then, he focused his delirium dharma eye on the fine lines of the water flow. After looking at it carefully for a moment, Xiaohua had an idea in his heart. Just as Xueqi said, the fine lines were slowly slowing down. Moreover, the collisions between the different colored fine lines were starting to lessen. Xiaohua could even see a slightly chaotic order in the fine lines before his eyes. Seeing the delusion breaker Dharma eye on Xiaohua's forehead disappear, Xueqi asked with some concern, "How is it? Your divine art didn't suffer any backlash from the meteor belt, right?" Xiaohua's heart warmed slightly. This kind of adventure was a true adventure. There was no need to worry about being tricked by others. If there was some danger, others would even block it for you. Xiaohua smiled and said, "Senior, you should know that this divine ability of mine usually won't backfire." "Well, what did you see?" Unlike Xueqi, Fairy Xingyu urged. "Can you see the passage they flew through?" Xiaohua shook his head and said, "There is no passage in this meteor belt. We can only rush through it slowly like what you said just now." "Oh." Fairy Xingyu responded with some disappointment. "However, I saw that these different auras are slowing down. Moreover, there is a certain order between the auras." Xiaohua said again. A strange look flashed across Xueqi's eyes as he whispered, "Your divine art? Is it the Buddha's heavenly eye?" "Well, it's somewhat similar." Xiaohua didn't hide it and replied, "However, there is also a big difference. My Dharma eye is much more powerful than heavenly eye." "You're just bluffing." Fairy Xingyu didn't believe him. "Also," Xiaohua pointed to the two sides and asked, "Is there no other place that is easy to pass through?" "Actually, there are other pavilions in this meteor belt that we can go to." Xueqi explained, "However, those pavilions require some strange tokens. Fairy Xingyu and I didn't find any, so we can't enter those pavilions. On the other side of this meteor belt, there are some places that don't require tokens. In particular, there is one place that might be the passage, so we have to go through there. When Xueqi and I first came here, we spent most of our time in this meteor belt, so we know the situation on the other side of this meteor belt the best." Fairy Xingyu added, "This meteor belt is almost endless. Even with our ability, we can't find the end of it. In the nearby hundreds of thousands of miles, only this place has a relatively weak aura. There are also times when it has a lull. The other places are like rivers, and the auras of the various realms are like waves, never calming down. We can't pass through it all." "Senior, you must have tried other methods." Xiaohua probed. "Were they all ineffective?" "Yes." Xueqi nodded. "After finding a pavilion with a strong immortal spiritual aura, we were a little impatient when we entered. When we passed through this meteor belt, we tried to use the flowing cloud bridge of the immortal realm. Not only did it not bring us to the other side of the meteor belt, but it also almost destroyed my physical body at that time. Senior, can you protect me?" Xiaohua pondered for a moment and asked, "What do you want to do?" Xueqi frowned. "Since we're here, don't fail at the last step. Why don't you wait for a while?" "Junior will try." Xiaohua smiled. "If it works, not only will Senior have more confidence, but Junior will also have more means to protect my life in this Star Moon Palace." "It's better not to try." Xueqi's concern was like facing his own junior. He said, "Fairy Xingyu and I didn't tell you the details of the Star Moon Palace because we were afraid that you would have your own ideas and inevitably use your own methods. You just need to follow behind us and contribute when it's time. Junior will try." Xiaohua still refused to give up. If there's anything unusual about this meteor belt, Senior only needs to block the backlash of the meteor belt. Presumably, Senior already has some experience, right? Xueqi was a little unhappy. He glanced at Xiaohua and said, "Have you really decided?" "Yes. Junior wants to try." Xiaohua nodded affirmatively. "Well, you can cast the spell." Xueqi agreed. If there's anything unusual, I'll block the backlash for you. However, the backlash of this meteor belt is very strange. I'm not sure if I can block it. You have to be careful too. Xiaohua responded. His eyes narrowed slightly, and the soul silk between his eyebrows rushed out. In an instant, a ghostly chanting sound came from the soul silk. One by one, green seal characters flew out from between his eyebrows and quickly separated and combined in midair. Shaman. Fairy Xingyue opened her mouth. Her eyes filled with horror. Suji's expression also changed drastically. Before Xueqi could stop Xiaohua, he saw the green seal text land in the sky of the meteor belt. A tumbling teleportation channel slowly appeared, and within the teleportation channel, the green seal text swarmed towards the opposite side of the meteor belt. However, just as this technique passed through the golden light that Xiaohua's delusion breaker eye could see, the runes in the golden light immediately transformed into a long spear that was several feet long. It let out a sharp whistle and crazily rushed into the green seal text. Pa! With a loud sound, the green seal text of the word transmit completely collapsed. The transmission channel that had just been formed also collapsed from the inside out. When the transmission channel turned into hundreds of small green seal characters, more golden runes once again turned into thumb-sized spears and pierced into the smaller green seal characters. Pa pa pa. More rumbling sounds were heard until all the green seal characters were destroyed. Not only that, when the green seal characters disappeared, the golden light condensed into a spear several feet long and pierced toward Xiaohua's eyebrows like lightning and thunder. Get out of the way! Although Xueqi couldn't see the spear condensed from the golden light, he could feel the recoil of the meteor belt. Seeing that the attack was even more powerful than the one he had encountered before, Xueqi shouted loudly, and his figure was about to block in front of Xiaohua. No need! Xiaohua felt a strong wind coming from between his eyebrows. Even his delusion breaker eye seemed to be blown apart by this strong wind. Xiaohua hurriedly shouted, "We'll just use the thunder technique to block this attack." As he spoke, lightning surged around Xiaohua's body. 4-colored lightning shot out from his hand and pounced on the spear-shaped runes. Okay. Xueqi didn't dare to be careless. His hands formed seals, and 2 water-blue lightning passed through the space and merged with Xiaohua's 4-colored lightning. Bang! With a loud bang, the 5-colored lightning was smashed into powder. The spear condensed by the golden runes didn't collapse, but its sharpness was already reduced by 60%. Xiaohua's figure flashed, and in an instant, the spear didn't even touch his shadow. Bang! Not far behind Xiaohua, the starry sky was destroyed by the invisible spear, and a huge black hole appeared. A strong suction force came from the black hole, sucking in the nearby fluctuations and aura. Xiaohua and the others were slightly shocked. They each used their magical powers to teleport away, avoiding the suction force of the black hole. After a few minutes, the black hole slowly disappeared, and Xiaohua flew back. How was it? Xueqi asked, have you given up? Yes, I know. Xiaohua nodded. He had really given up. It seemed that the soul cultivation technique, which had always been successful, had lost its former power in the Star Moon Palace built in ancient times. Fairy Xingyu said with a smile, Xueqi, Xiaohua is doing this out of kindness. He just wants to save us some trouble. He's just trying to be brave and competitive. Xiaohua smiled faintly and didn't admit it. Xueqi glanced at Xiaohua with a cold expression. He then looked at Fairy Xingyu and said, I haven't been a judge for many years. I'm no longer as cold-blooded as before. Furthermore, I was once an ordinary mortal. Naturally, I can see these things as well. Chapter 45:10. After that, Xueqi looked at Xiaohua again and said earnestly, Xiaohua, have you forgotten? Xingyue and I have already warned you. Some magical powers should not be revealed in front of others. Did you take it as a passing wind? Although we don't understand the magical power you just used, how can we not know what it is? Taboo power is the most taboo power in the immortal world. As long as there is a taboo power, the celestial venerables will hunt it down and eliminate it. I know you trust us, but we don't dare to trust ourselves. Who knows what kind of interrogation we will encounter when we return to the immortal world? Even if it's a soul search, it's normal. We can't guarantee that we won't reveal your secret. If this matter brings disaster to you, then you can only blame yourself. Xueqi's words were very strict, but they were sincere and sincere. Xiaohua seemed to see another helpless person standing in front of him and berating him. He straightened his face, bowed and said, "Yes, I understand. Thank you for your reminder, Senior. In this world, there is no one you can absolutely trust." The coldness on Xueqi's face lessened slightly, and he said, "It's just that the price of betrayal is different. If the price is high enough, some people may even abandon the realm that gave birth to them." "Yes, I've learned my lesson." Xiaohua, of course, knew the care in Xueqi's words. He didn't dare to straighten his back and answered respectfully, "It's good that you know. You're just two." Xueqi hesitated and stopped. He looked at the chaotic realm, and the aura gradually calmed down. He said, "Forget it, let's not talk about this. The meteor belt seems to have changed. Let's wait a little longer." Xiaohua agreed. In fact, he opened his illusion breaker eyes again and carefully observed the meteor belt. Fairy Xingyue watched Xueqi berate Xiaohua from the side. Her eyes showed a trace of confusion and a trace of complexity. At this time, the Xingyue palace had begun to bustle. Other than the 4 aristocratic families and some of the Confucian cultivators rushing to the meteor belt, the other Confucian cultivators and great demons of the demon clan also went to other places in the Xingyue palace. There were no traces of people outside the Xingyue palace. When the Xingyue palace moved again, even the starlight passage between the gate and the 1,000 demons' sacred realm could not hold on. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The entire starlight passage completely collapsed, and the passage was completely filled with chaotic storms. In just a moment, the starlight disappeared, and a powerful whirlwind in the interspace. The whirlwind blew out of the interlayer, scattering the power of the stars and the moon in the sky. Without the starlight passage, the Xingyue palace began to move faster. In the time it took to eat a meal, the huge aura within hundreds of thousands of miles was concealed in the void again. Boom! The moment the aura disappeared, the Chitty River, which had been split open by the Xingyue palace, let out a violent roar, and the river surged again. Furthermore, at the spot where the Xingyue palace had disappeared, the space within hundreds of thousands of miles seemed to have suddenly become completely empty. Endless qi of heaven and earth and noble qi surged in, forming a rare hurricane. Not only did the hurricane cause the wind and clouds to sway in the sky, but it also caused the Chitty River to surge with red waves. The waves surged violently, and the nearby mountain ranges were blown into flying sand and rolling stones, causing the forest to collapse. The previously bright starry sky was gone, and the hook-like crescent moon was even more desolate. Occasionally, it would appear in the gaps of the dark clouds. The moonlight was also scattered by the strong wind. The Xingyue palace appeared and disappeared again. It was unknown where it would appear again, and when it would appear again. "Senior." Xiaohua observed for a moment in front of the meteor belt and whispered, "It's about time. I feel that the aura in this area has begun to calm down. If I'm not wrong, I've found some patterns." Xueqi nodded. "It's similar to my perception, but I'm not sure. Tell me, which spatial fragment should we fly to?" Xiaohua explained, "Senior, I don't know which spatial fragment to fly to, but I know which spatial fragment has a stable aura." "I understand." Fairy Xingyue nodded. "According to our previous experience, there are currently 6 spatial fragments that we can enter. If there are other disciples, we will split into 6 groups and enter separately. Now that you can determine the stability of the spatial fragments, we don't have to test them one by one." "Which 6 spatial fragments?" Xiaohua asked hurriedly. Fairy Xingyue raised her hand and pointed. She did not point at the few spatial fragments closest to Xiaohua and the others. Instead, she pointed at 2 rectangular spatial fragments, 3 rectangular spatial fragments, and 1 6-star spatial fragment that was slightly further away. The 6-star spatial fragment was even further behind a pile of spatial fragments. Xiaohua was stunned. He looked up at Fairy Xingyue and said, "It seems, Senior, you're not just relying on your experience." "Is that so?" Fairy Xingyue shrugged and said, "I'm afraid you're mistaken. I didn't use any magical power. This is just my experience." Xiaohua nodded. "Senior, you're right. I understand. Then, Xiaohua pointed at the 6-star spatial fragment in the distance and said, "There's only one 6-star spatial fragment within a dozen miles of the left. The 6-star spatial fragment is very magical. Any spatial fragment that collides with it will turn into 6 wisps of aura. These 6 wisps of aura are easy to balance with each other. Other shapes don't have this characteristic. I think this 6-star spatial fragment is safer." Xiaohua only said that he was guessing and did not say what he had seen. Xueqi's cold face relaxed slightly. He nodded and said, "According to our previous experience, the normal shapes, such as rectangular and square, are similar to the fragments of the Thousand Demons' sacred realm. The strange line-like fragments are the fragments of the ancient desolation. The hexagonal, heptagonal, or other more complicated shapes should be similar to the fragments of the immortal world, the Demon League, and even the Dragon Realm. And according to our experience, the fragments with complicated shapes are usually at the back. We won't choose such a fragment for the first time." Fairy Xingyue added. Hearing Fairy Xingyue mention experience, Xueqi looked up at her and smiled bitterly. It was just a little late. Their previous experience was already unreliable. What was the use of mentioning experience now? Haha, maybe there's a transmission channel in this fragment? Xiaohua said optimistically. "Senior, how should we go in? Are we just going to fly in like that?" "Of course not. That's courting death." Fairy Xingyue shook her head and took out a magic weapon that looked like an astrolabe from her soft armor. She looked around and took a few steps sideways. Then, she looked around again and took 2 more steps forward. Xiaohua noticed that there was a flame flashing in Fairy Xingyue's right eye. Although the flame had a strong aura of starlight, Xiaohua could see clearly that there were also very few green threads of light in it. Forbidden power. Xiaohua narrowed his eyes. He knew that Xueqi was not exaggerating. In order to destroy the Tao, the immortals, Buddhas, and demons could join forces to wipe out the Tao sect cultivators from the 3 continents. Immortal Emperor Gaochen could also raise the Tao sect cultivators like dogs in the Peng Lai immortal realm. Since the immortals of the immortal world regarded soul cultivation as a taboo, they would definitely have more powerful and violent means to deal with matters related to soul cultivation. Then, why did the immortal world regard soul cultivation as a taboo power? Judging from the few traces of green seal script in Fairy Xingyue's cultivation method, which was similar to the immortal world's cultivation method, Xiaohua knew that soul cultivation could connect heaven and earth and make ghosts and gods weep. Thinking of this, Xiaohua could not help but send a voice transmission. "Senior, I still have a question that I want to ask you." Hearing Xiaohua's voice transmission, Xueqi frowned and said, "Since you shouldn't ask, then, don't ask. Even if you ask, I won't answer." "Alas, I know I shouldn't ask. But the problem is, apart from you, I really can't find anyone in the 3 continents to ask." Xiaohua said helplessly. "And you're the only person in the world that I can trust." "I've already told you that no one in the world can be trusted. Including me." Xueqi replied mercilessly. However, Xueqi thought for a moment and said, "If you think you have to ask, you can ask, but I can decide not to answer." Xiaohua nodded hurriedly. Looking at Fairy Xingyue, who was wandering in the starry sky, he asked, "I've seen the Devil World's Devil Emperor sacrifice millions of blood spirits. He wanted to borrow the souls of those blood spirits. I don't understand. What's the use of these souls? Of course, in our Taoist Dharma spells, refining our natal Dharma treasures and cultivating the nascent soul out of the body also require the power of souls. I know this, but I don't understand. With so many souls, what kind of divine ability can you cultivate?" "You should ask the devil race this question." Xueqi did not want to answer Xiaohua's question. Xiaohua smiled bitterly. He himself had a demon lord's little brother, and this little brother was a pure demon clan's devil spirit. He also had the devil blade murder, but Xiaohua was clear in his heart that the demon clan devoured souls and raised them based on their instincts. They really didn't know the true use of souls, or perhaps only a higher realm than the demon realm would know. Seeing Xiaohua's bitter smile, Xueqi seemed to be unable to bear it. He thought for a moment and said, "The human race often says that human nature is the most complicated thing in the world. Then this soul is the most mysterious thing in the world. Even immortals don't dare to touch the power of souls. Let's put it this way. The foundation of the Buddhist sect's 9 transformations golden body is reincarnation, and the foundation of reincarnation is the soul. The foundation of the Buddhist sect's golden body and Buddha fruit is faith. Faith is a manifestation of the power of souls. Just this manifestation has created the Buddhist sect, a Buddhist sect that can compete with the Taoist sect. How big of an impact do you think the power of souls will have? Oh, Xiaohua, what do you think is the most primitive power of souls? Chapter 45:11. Of course, Xiaohua knew that the answer Xueqi was talking about was probably the soul. However, he thought about it and answered in the opposite way. From what I know, it should be pure physical strength. Yes, you're right. Xueqi nodded. Whether it's the human race, the demon race, the spirit race, the devil race, or the divine race and the holy light race that you don't know about, they all admit that the most primitive power in this world is the physical strength. Of course, the physical bodies of the other races may be different from the physical bodies of the human race. However, as far as I know, an immortal king who once came into contact with a forbidden power said that the most primitive power in this world is probably the soul power. Because the soul was formed long before the physical body can decay and decay, but the soul exists forever. Junior understands. Xiaohua nodded. You don't understand. Xueqi interrupted Xiaohua unceremoniously and continued to explain. I don't know if you know about the underworld. The underworld has the power of the dead, which is also a part of the soul power. The power of the dead is the nemesis of all magic power, immortal power, and Buddhist power. The underworld is not a simple world. It is the place where all life is annihilated and where all life sprouts. Even someone as strong as the heavenly lord of punishment of the punishment palace doesn't dare to provoke the underworld because the underworld has a part of the soul power. Xiaohua, Taoists can become immortals by cultivating spells, Confucian cultivators can ascend to heaven by cultivating Confucian techniques, Buddhists can cultivate the 9 transformations golden body, demons can break through the starry sky by tempering their demonic bodies. Then, those who can control the soul power can cultivate gods. Gods? Xiaohua pretended to be surprised. Gods? What are they? Can they also be cultivated? Xueqi didn't answer. He saw that Fairy Xingyu had stopped and turned to look at him. He nodded at Fairy Xingyu and stared at Xiaohua. Xiaohua, this is my last sentence. In the future, don't ask any other immortal such questions. Gods may be the end of the immortals' cultivation, or the end of the demon league, the immortal world, and the heavenly court. However, no immortal knows whether or not he will be a god at the end of his cultivation. Because there is a saying in the immortal world, gods can never be cultivated. Only the ancient times had gods. In the current era, there are no more miracles, and no more gods. So, Xiaohua, there's no need to talk about taboo energy in the future. After saying that, Xueqi moved and landed beside Fairy Xingyue. He asked, Xingyue, are you ready? Yes, I can activate it now. Fairy Xingyue nodded and said, however, I need a breath of immortal qi. I just changed my body, so I can't activate the immortal mark. Then let me do it. Xueqi raised his hand to take the astrolabe, but Fairy Xingyu said worriedly, you just used a similar immortal technique. Can your body withstand it? Didn't I just say it? I don't need this body anymore. It won't be a problem. Xueqi indifferently said and took the star plate. Then he shouted to Xiaohua who was in a daze. Xiaohua, quickly come over, we are about to enter. After saying that, Xueqi raised his eyebrows again. He looked at the distant starry sky and saw a fat figure. He snorted coldly and said, you're fast. It's only been a moment. I'm afraid you've already killed a few more people. Of course he doesn't care about other people's lives. Fairy Xingyue also said coldly, he only cares about his own life. Xiaohua was a little shocked by Xueqi's words. At this time, he had just come to his senses. He turned his head and looked at the body of the Buddha occupied by the Grand Mist Ancestor. He suddenly understood and sighed. I'd rather betray the world than let the world betray me. Let's go, I don't want to see this filthy thing. Xueqi raised his hand and threw the astrolabe into the air. He spat a mouthful of immortal qi on the astrolabe. The astrolabe did not change, but Xueqi's face began to look old. His sideburns were stained with white frost, and his face was full of wrinkles. Seeing this, Xiaohua was suddenly shocked and felt a chill run down his back. The warning of the Hutu Stockade's elder Wu rang in his ears again. Xueqi's words just now also rang in his ears. He thought with a trembling heart, I don't know if my body is worth the trust in Xueqi's heart? Xueqi's celestial spiritual chi landed on the astrolabe, and a silvery white brilliance appeared on the astrolabe. Layers of mysterious markings rushed out from the brilliance, and these markings were formed by densely packed runes. As the markings flew out, Xueqi rubbed his hands together, and thick crystal lights fell into the astrolabe. The markings then turned into hundreds of flying birds, and these birds had starlight engraved on their foreheads. Their eyes were like crescent moons, and when their wings flapped, the sound of wind and thunder could be heard. Go! Xueqi waved his sleeve. The hundreds of birds flew into the meteor belt with a quack-quack sound. Let's go. We'll use the simplest flying technique. Xueqi returned the astrolabe to Fairy Xingyu and put his hands behind his back. A faint cloud appeared under his feet, and he rushed into the meteor belt with the birds. Fairy Xingyu took the astrolabe, raised her slender hand, and pointed at different places on the astrolabe. The astrolabe emitted several layers of obscure fluctuations, directing the birds to fly in an extremely zigzagging direction. However, after flying for hundreds of feet, the bird in front exploded with a boom. The birds behind it immediately flapped their tails and flew in another direction beautifully. The fierce inter-realm storm around them was like the night wind, causing the feathers of the birds to tremble slightly. Xiaohua and the others naturally followed the birds and flew in another direction. The six-star space fragment looked very close, but it was extremely far away. After flying for the time it took for an incense stick to burn, one of the hundreds of birds would be destroyed in a short while. After the time it took for an incense stick to burn, there were less than 20 birds left. Looking at the six-star-shaped space fragment again, it seemed to still be flickering with faint starlight in the distance. Xueqi said in a low voice, "Every realm has an edge. There's never an endless thing. The reason why it feels endless is because you're in the realm. As long as you're in the realm, if you don't have a magical power that transcends the realm, even if you reach the edge of the realm, you still won't be able to see the realm. So, you'll feel that the realm is endless. These space fragments come from different realms. The aura of each realm is different, and the aura of the fragments won't merge. Therefore you can see each space fragment as an independent realm. You're in the meteor belt, so you can also see a larger space fragment. If you can't find a way to enter the space fragment, it will always keep a distance from you." Xueqi, Fairy Xingyu said with some dissatisfaction. "Didn't you say that you can't reveal too much about the immortal divinity? You can't reveal too much about the immortal realm to Xiaohua. How can you casually tell Xiaohua about the immortal realm? This is just to broaden his horizons. It's not considered teaching him the mysteries of the immortal realm." Xueqi said disapprovingly. "Besides, he's already seen the seven-colored shell. Do you think he didn't get anything from it?" Hee. Xiaohua smiled and asked, "Fairy, I have a question, but I don't know if I should ask it." "Don't ask." Fairy Xingyu hurriedly waved her hand and said, "Your question must involve the immortal realm again." "Okay then." Xiaohua shrugged and immediately stopped asking. However, a smile had already appeared at the corner of his mouth. Sure enough, after a while, Fairy Xingyu urged again. "What are you asking? Why aren't you talking?" Hee. Xiaohua blinked and asked, "Senior, you came from the Palace of Justice. You must know the various realms very well?" "I don't know." Fairy Xingyu shook her head like a rattledrum. "I'm just occasionally ordered by the Palace of Justice to check some things. I've met the demon clan of the 10,000 demon realm who broke through the realms in the Dawn Rain continent. I've also met the seven-colored sea god shell from the Red Sea domain in the Thousand Demons sacred realm. Well, the two seniors are also from the immortal realm. I'm very curious. Why is it so easy to break through the realms?" Xiaohua ignored Fairy Xingyu's shaking of her head and asked seriously. "Didn't Senior Su just say that it's difficult to break through the realms in the realms? It's naturally difficult to break through the ordinary realms, but the three continents are a bit special." Fairy Xingyu was a female immortal after all, so she couldn't help showing off a little. However, she only said half a sentence and stopped. She raised her hand and pointed at the 6-star space fragment that still looked very far away. Look again. Is it close to that space fragment? Xiaohua knew that Fairy Xingyu wouldn't say anything else, so he had no choice but to prepare to activate his delusion breaker Dharma Eye. However, before he activated it, he suddenly thought of something and said with a smile, "Fairy, I don't know any special spells. Of course, I can't see any clues. Everything still depends on your magic power." Fairy Xingyu glanced at Xiaohua and rolled her eyes at him. Then, she spat out a mouthful of quintessential essence at the astrolabe in her hand. Swoosh! A pillar of stars rushed out of the astrolabe and caught up with the few remaining birds in front of them. Caw! The birds cried out sadly and turned into fireflies. Then, the entire pillar of stars swept toward the space fragment like a whirlwind. Poof, poof, poof. The sound of explosions came from the pillar of stars. The aura of the realms had hit the pillar of stars and made it full of holes. However, the shattered pillar of stars also revealed a safe path at this time and fell into the brilliance of the space fragment. Xueqi was still in front. His figure followed the pillar of stars and fell into the brilliance. Xiaohua could clearly see that Xueqi's figure was getting smaller and smaller. Xiaohua watched Xueqi's figure shrink. Outside the meteor belt in the distance, the fat figure of the Grand Mist Ancestor appeared again. The Grand Mist Ancestor squinted and watched Xiaohua and the other two shrink and fall into the hexagonal space fragment with a solemn expression on his face. Chapter 45:12. The Grand Mist Ancestor originally wanted to fly over and enter the meteor belt with Xiaohua and the others. However, when he saw Xueqi spurting out immortal spiritual energy and activating the astrolabe, he stopped in the distance. It was only when Xiaohua and the others flew in that he quickly flew over. He looked at the backs of the three people and thought to himself, although this person looks a little unfamiliar, the way he activates the astrolabe is exactly the same as that person. If I'm not mistaken, it's him. Humph, since he's still alive, why didn't he save me? This kind of senior. It's fine if I don't recognize him. With that thought, the Grand Mist Ancestor waved his fat monk robe. 2 balls of black and white air flew out and turned into thousands of thin threads in the meteor belt. These thin threads seemed to have intelligence and were rapidly drawn into the turbulent flow of the realm. They were either torn apart or moved against the flow. In just a moment, the turbulent flow that was invisible to the naked eye and divine sense was clearly revealed to the Grand Mist Ancestor. He watched as the black and white threads spread further and gradually covered the space fragments within a dozen li. The black and white threads were indeed effective. Wherever there was a dead end, the black and white threads would cut off randomly. Wherever there was a way out, the threads would rapidly extend and reveal the path of light. Seeing this, the Grand Mist Ancestor smiled proudly. This old man has the yin-yang illustration manual. In this star-moon palace, there's nothing that can stop me. With that said, the Grand Mist Ancestor's figure flickered as he stepped onto the black and white thread. The black and white thread immediately turned into a cloud that carried him towards the nearest light path. When the Grand Mist Ancestor's figure gradually shrank, the figures of the scholarly cultivators and the great monsters of the demon race appeared. Xiaohua followed Fairy Xingyu and flew along the Pillar of Stars. The pillar of stars in front of the realm's aura presented a very strange distorted shape. It was like a fried dough twist with 6 revolutions. 3 of the revolutions were blurry and indistinguishable by the time they reached the space. The remaining 3 were crooked as they probed into the space's brilliance. As for the pillar of stars, it was destroyed by the realm's aura. In front of the 2 was Xueqi. Xueqi seemed to be very familiar with this situation. Without any hesitation, not only did he fly with the pillar of stars, he also spun with the pillar of stars. In fact, there were many times when he was still facing down in Xiaohua's eyes. Xiaohua didn't dare to act rashly. His entire body followed the rotation of the star pillar. He didn't dare to be careless at all. After circling around a few times, Xiaohua suddenly heard a rumbling sound beside his ears. In a flash, the hexagonal spatial fragment that wasn't too far from him suddenly appeared in front of him. The hexagonal fragment had already disappeared, and what entered his eyes was only an enormous light shadow. This light shadow was like a huge dome of heaven, covering the entire space. Moreover, Under this dome of heaven, there were several kinds of indescribable auras. These auras interweaved together, blocking the light shadow. However, within the light and shadow, the star pillar had already pierced into the light and shadow, and a series of phantoms that resembled doors appeared in the light and shadow. At this time, Xueqi had already stopped. His hands moved slightly, and streaks of water-blue thunderbolts appeared like horned dragons, slowly rolling up and down his body. Fairy Xingyu's face was also solemn. She raised her hands slightly, put away the astrolabe, and took out a magic weapon that looked like a crescent moon. The soft armor on her body also emitted starlight, and a faintly discernible restriction protected her body. Xiaohua. Xueqi called out without turning his head. Take out your magic weapon. I don't know what kind of space is inside this spatial fragment, and I don't know which realm this fragment came from. Yes. As Xiaohua spoke, he took out the Tangjiao shears from his bosom. Under the urging of his magic power, the entire Tangjiao shears emitted a dazzling golden light. Seeing this dazzling golden light swimming in Xiaohua's hand like a dragon, Fairy Xingyu couldn't help but exclaim, "What a treasure! Xiaohua, I really didn't expect you to have a capital spiritual treasure. It's a pity that this capital spiritual treasure is somewhat incomplete." "I was lucky," Xiaohua said with a smile. "I snatched it from the Xiaoyu continent. That person took half of it that day, and I don't know where the other half is. It's good that you can use it." Xueqi didn't say much. He watched as the shadow of the star pillar crashed into the space gradually solidified. He shouted, "Xingyu, Xiaohua, let's rush in." Okay. Fairy Xingyu and Xiaohua shouted in unison, urging their figures to rush toward the shadow of the door at the same time. Boom. Just as Xiaohua rushed into the light shadow, he felt that his surroundings were surrounded by clouds and mist, followed by the sound of thunder. Bolts of heavenly lightning fell on top of his head like the Milky Way spilling out. Moreover, there was an inexplicable pressure on Xiaohua's body. This pressure was so great that it felt as if the whole world was pressing down on his shoulders, making it difficult for him to move. However, this was nothing. The strangest thing was that in addition to the heavy pressure on Xiaohua's body, there were also tens of millions of tiny vortexes trying to drill into Xiaohua's body. A sour and painful feeling came from his body. Humph. Xiaohua snorted coldly and urged his transcendence golden body. While his body was flowing with golden light, his figure continued to expand. Swish swish. Without waiting for Xiaohua to straighten his back, two silvery white human-shaped lights that were at least 3,000 meters long appeared in front of his head. Moreover, from those lights, there was a kind of pressure that made Xiaohua feel fear. It surged towards Xiaohua like a surging tide, blocking Xiaohua's mouth and nose. Moreover, the pressure was like a mountain pressing down. Xiaohua's Mahayana cultivator's pressure couldn't help but be stimulated, and he tried his best to resist. However, this pressure was nothing more than a pellet in front of the mountain-like pressure. There was no way it could compare at all. Large beads of sweat dripped down from Xiaohua's temples. Xiaohua's straight body was slightly bent as an irresistible fear arose spontaneously. This is the fragment of the immortal realm? Fairy Xingyu was a little puzzled, a little surprised, and screamed with ecstasy. "Don't be in such a hurry to look at the fragment." Xueqi's calm voice sounded. "We didn't expect that the first fragment to be the same space as the immortal realm. Our top priority now is to quickly stabilize the immortal qi in our bodies. Don't strengthen it anymore, or our bodies won't be able to support it. Oh, quickly restrain your pressure. Xiaohua doesn't have any consciousness, so he can't resist our spiritual pressure." As he spoke, the mountain-like pressure gradually shrank and fell into the silvery light. Only then did Xiaohua breathe a sigh of relief. He opened his mouth to say something in a hoarse voice, but the abundant immortal qi rushed into his mouth and nose again. This immortal qi was of a much higher level than the yuan qi of heaven and earth in the three continents. When it rushed into Xiaohua's mouth and nose, it immediately caused discomfort in his body. He didn't know how many years he had not felt choking on water, but it rushed into his head. Xiaohua didn't dare to be negligent. He hurriedly held his breath and condensed his qi, urging the Dharma power in his body to create a defense on the surface of his body. Before he could urge his Dharma power, Xueqi's voice sounded from the silvery light. His voice was like a thunderclap that resounded through the entire space. "Xiaohua, don't urge your Dharma power. All your spells now are based on the yuan qi of heaven and earth in the three continents. This is a fragment of the realm similar to the immortal realm. The immortal chi inside is similar to the immortal realm. When this immortal chi comes into contact with spells based on the yuan chi of heaven and earth, it will change. If it's light, it will destroy the spell. If it's heavy, it will cause a backlash and invade your body. Okay. Xiaohua didn't speak and hurriedly nodded. Then, from another silvery human figure, an object that emitted the brilliance of the stars and moon flew out. Fairy Xing Yu's voice also sounded from it. Humph, I hate stingy people like you the most. I don't believe that you don't have a protective heavenly spiritual treasure. If it weren't for the fact that this is a fragment of the immortal realm and I'm afraid that your body would explode from the immortal chi, I wouldn't have bothered to give you my immortal armor. The object landed in front of Xiaohua. It was a very simple and crude star armor. This star armor was refined from some strange star stones. Between the star stones were some crystal threads that were as thin as hair. These crystal threads not only strung the star stones together, but they also flashed with traces of cold light, looking very sharp. Xiaohua took the star armor and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. After all, this was Fairy Xing Yu's star armor. How could he, a male cultivator, wear it? This suspicion. He still had to avoid it. You can't activate this star armor now. Xueqi's voice sounded. Put it on first. I'll activate it for you. Since Xueqi didn't say anything, Xiaohua could only obey. He threw the star armor, which fell like a fishing net. The 100 or so star stones on the star armor covered Xiaohua's body. Xiaohua deliberately looked at his chest. Fortunately, there weren't any extra star stones. Gotcha. Hundreds of silver-white thunderbolts appeared in the silver figure that Xueqi was in and gathered on every star stone on the star armor. Rumble. The star armor actually rumbled like a Dharma treasure. The 100 or so star stones turned into the shape of stars and began to rotate. The immortal chi nearby also let out a cheerful cry and crashed into the stars. In just a moment, the stars turned into pieces and the entire star armor turned into a strange armor that covered Xiaohua's body. Once the armor was formed, the corrosion from the immortal chi disappeared immediately. The corrosion on his mouth and nose also disappeared. Xiaohua looked at the armor that was flowing with starlight and moved his hands and feet. He frowned slightly. This was because his body didn't have any special discomfort in the ruins or the primitive continent. Why were there so many abnormalities in this fragment of the immortal realm? Gotcha. Xiaohua's problem was solved. Tens of thousands of tiny thunderbolts appeared around the silver figure that Xueqi was in. These thunderbolts were like horned dragons that surrounded the silver figure and rotated crazily. The silver figure also gradually shrank with the rotation of the thunderbolts. At the same time, a resplendent galaxy flew out from the silver figure of another silver figure and also rotated from top to bottom. Every time it rotated, some of the silver light fell into the galaxy. The silver light that was thousands of feet in size shrank almost simultaneously with Xueqi's silver light. You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.